Inside elven territory, Roman noted how elves typically retained youthful appearances until death. He expected the mother elf to match this, but she appeared elderly, wrinkled face, frost-white hair. She greeted him warmly, her frail voice carrying deep authority. She asked if he knew of the demon realm. Roman confirmed the world's structure: heavenly realm, demon realm, and mortal realm, separated by supreme laws to prevent interference. The mother elf explained a rift had formed when a foreign being entered the Salamander continent, causing chill to leak through and freeze Arcadia. Roman wondered if she meant Alexander, or even himself. She continued that weakening dimensional walls allowed Graxar to accept demon realm power, turning him into a demon. She warned this was just the beginning. The being who shattered the balance must be eliminated to prevent total collapse. The mother elf described the Demon King, a godlike entity currently bound by laws. Once fully descended, nothing could stop it. Roman realized why Kronos had abandoned pride for a truce with Dmitri. They anticipated the dimensional chaos. If Graxar was merely a subordinate, human forces alone couldn't prevail. Roman reflected that his own existence might serve as a counterbalance. In his previous world, he had been too powerful, unable to fully manifest heavenly realm arts. Demon realm foes could finally push him to his limits. When asked his stance, Roman said he made no promises, but would remove any obstacles in his path. The mother elf offered a gift: communion with the world tree for glimpses of past, present, and future. Though typically reserved for her alone, they made an exception for Arcadia's savior. Roman accepted, approaching the frozen, withered giant. Its skeletal branches loomed like a tombstone for the continent. Touching the bark triggered a golden aura, enveloping both him and the tree. Ice melted from its surface, steam rising as life returned, green buds emerging, bark smoothing. Teresa watched in awe. Roman's consciousness detached, becoming a weightless spirit of light. Roman found himself in Kronos' founding emperor's hidden chamber. Hooded figures knelt before Alexander, reporting unrest. Duke Vito and others, resentful of Valhalla's corruption, were rallying nobles. Civil war loomed if suppressed by force. Alexander smiled darkly, dismissing Roman Dmitri as insignificant. He ordered preparations. The moment Valhalla fell into chaos, their opportunity would arrive. Roman understood Alexander's silence. They waited like scavengers for the perfect strike. The scene shifted to Queen Isabel, severely wounded, slumped against a tree. A soldier urged her to flee to Luna, as Kronos had discovered their plans. She refused, citing her prophesied destiny. Having sent her followers to death, she couldn't abandon them. Rising despite her injuries, she ordered Knight Commander Leo to return to Luna. It was a queen's command. As she vanished into the darkness, Roman's consciousness returned. He connected the visions. Valhalla, demons, Alexander, Isabel, all pieces of encroaching darkness. Following Isabel would reveal the full truth. Elves knelt before Roman, pledging their race's loyalty. Flashback to the golden resonance. The mother elf recognized his power as flames of the fire demon, now bringing life. The world tree regenerated before their eyes, their centuries-old wish fulfilled. Tears flowed as Teresa declared Roman the prophesied savior, ordering all to follow him. Jero and Caden arrived from the forest edge. Jero bowed deeply, grateful for Luna's salvation, offering his service. Roman asked Caden about their contract terms. Caden confirmed Luna's loyalty to Dmitri in exchange for aid. Roman noted Dmitri had fulfilled its end by eliminating the orcs. Turning to the elves, he rejected uncompensated loyalty. The mother elf replied that the world tree's revival through his power was reward enough. Arcadia now had hope. Roman accepted. In return for their service, Dmitri would protect both elves and Luna. He stood as undisputed guardian of the continent, having seen its threats and secured its key allies. Arcadia's survival now depends on unity among its races, but tensions from distant empires threaten to unravel everything. As Roman Dmitri navigates alliances and hidden agendas, visitors from Valhalla arrive with divided loyalties. What game is the Emperor playing? Arcadia's top priority became self-sufficiency through collective strength. Elves would focus on farming and cultivation across the region. Humans and other races divided remaining labor among themselves. Using the World Tree's power, they established a war gate linking Dmitri to the Salamander continent, creating a secure trade route. Without developing independent survival capabilities, Arcadia's downfall was inevitable. The meeting concluded, and elders from various races returned to Dmitri Castle in Goddess Mountains. Someone presented a report. Odelia's condition worsened daily. With the royal family vanished, conflicts erupted everywhere. Southern Kronos states, Umberto, Redford and Fronter, insisted on direct talks regarding the crisis. Roman Dmitri asked about the investigation he had ordered. Results showed Queen Isabel's last trace in the Kingdom of Winter. She reorganized her forces there before disappearing again, destination unknown. Roman inquired about Connual and Commander Jonathan next. 2 guests from Valhalla had arrived, Sanchez and Count Bragan. Sanchez, disciple of Sanchez Morales, led key rebel forces. Count Bragan appeared loyal to Valhalla's emperor. Amid these complications, the meeting ended for now. Count Bragan contemplated his mission. Pressure Roman Dmitri to prevent him from joining Duke Victor, no matter the method. This task proved difficult, as Roman operated in a world of power where persuasion rarely worked easily. A servant informed Bragan that Lord Roman was occupied and unavailable. Bragan wondered if Roman had met Sanchez first, given rumours of Valhalla's 3 visitor factions as dangerous rebel influences. Later, Sanchez met Roman. He sought aid against Valhalla's emperor. Roman explained the empire's split. The emperor's faction versus rebels aiming to restore Valhalla's foundational principles of nature. The emperor's strongest warriors and army remained blindly loyal. Sanchez pressed for direct support to advance Valhalla. Roman refused outright involvement, as it would undermine the rebels' legitimacy. He questioned why rebels needed him if they truly had popular backing. True removal of the emperor required Valhalla's own strength. Roman offered indirect aid under conditions, a temporary alliance until Kronos fell, ensuring Valhalla stayed out of his path. That evening, Count Bragan requested another meeting, but Dmitri Castle replied that the young lord remained busy with private matters. Wait in the guest room. Days passed. Bragan's patience wore thin by the 3rd morning. He summoned Billy, ordering a meeting date by any means, even involving the Empire directly. Billy arrived at Dmitri Castle, meeting Hans, Roman's trusted aide. He demanded Count Bragan couldn't wait longer. A date would let them leave immediately. Hans calmly stated the young lord allowed no visitors until his private work finished. Billy lost his temper, insisting the request be forwarded. Hans refused, deeming forced meetings inappropriate. Billy moved to grab him, but a cold voice stopped him. "Lower your hand." Billy turned to see Kevin, Dmitri's most fearsome warrior and team member. Kevin approached slowly, voice icy. "What do you think you are?" Threatening Hans on Dmitri soil. This moment revealed to Valhalla's envoys the depth of Roman Dmitri's power. Not just his army, but his people. Loyalty ran through every layer, making intrusion impossible. Kevin confronts a Valhalla knight who crossed a line in Dmitri territory, unleashing a lesson in loyalty that echoes Roman's past ruthlessness. Count Bragan's patience frays as delays mount, leading to a tense meeting where power dynamics shift irreversibly. One man's insult becomes an empire's warning. Kevin positioned himself firmly in the room, his gaze locked on Billy with unyielding focus. He questioned Billy's audacity in threatening Hans within Dmitri walls. Billy shifted uncomfortably, dismissing the reaction as overblown and attempting to deflect. Kevin held his ground, his voice steady as a thickening red aura pulsed around him. Billy snapped back, declaring himself a Valhalla knight unbound by local rules, viewing Hans as insignificant. The room went silent. Kevin struck, a sharp slap that snapped Billy's head aside. Billy froze in shock, hand rising to his cheek. Kevin followed with more blows, each precise and unrelenting. To Kevin, Hans wasn't a servant. He was family who had supported Kevin's kin in their darkest times. Insulting him crossed an unforgivable boundary. Billy collapsed to his knees, bloodied and dazed, muttering his Valhalla status in disbelief. A private soldier from a duchy had overpowered him effortlessly. Kevin loomed above, red aura flickering like restrained flame, offering a story rooted in Roman's teachings from a Barco family event, where insults to Dmitri met swift, brutal ends. Kevin recalled Roman's advice: learn to judge true worth. Billy fit the profile perfectly. With a grim smile, Kevin resumed, leaving Billy broken amid blood spray. Later, bandaged and slumped, Billy faced Count Bragan, whose rage simmered beneath the surface. Bragan saw the incident as Roman's deliberate provocation to provoke Valhalla emotionally. He resolved to endure, plotting revenge through patience until facing Roman directly. Meanwhile, Roman ended a magical communication with southern Kronos kings, Umberto, Redford, Fronter, agreeing to joint action on Odilia's refugee crisis. Hans entered. Roman stated it was time to meet Count Bragan, a subtle smile indicating full control of the timing. They sat across, tension thick. Bragan commented on the week's delay casually, though anger showed. Roman sipped tea, admitting busyness and suggesting advance notice for future visits. Bragan shifted to Billy's incident, demanding accountability for dishonouring a Valhalla knight. Roman countered that Billy struck first. Bragan insisted on status difference between servant and knight. Roman revealed Hans had been offered nobility for loyal service, but chose to stay as butler, family equivalent in Dmitri house. Bragan pressed that relations with Valhalla demanded consideration. Roman's eyes sharpened. Why should they refrain from touching Valhalla people? Bragan fell silent, sweat forming. Roman dismantled his delusions, recounting Valhalla's festival assassination attempt and follow-up schemes via Kronos. Roman's demeanour grew colder, dark purple aura filling the room with crushing pressure. He challenged Bragan, convinced him why execution shouldn't happen here. Bragan appealed to pragmatism. Past enemies needn't be future ones, offering non-interference in Valhalla's civil war, even aid against Kronos. Roman rejected the empty promises. With Kevin's shadow looming, Bragan's pride crumbled to survival instinct. Roman saw no value in letting him live. Far away, Marquis Vela's office bustled until a soldier delivered a wooden box from Count Bragan. Vela smiled, expecting success against Roman. Confidence faded as he opened it. Inside, amid dried bloodstains, lay Bragan's severed head. Silence gripped the room. Vela screamed Roman Dmitri's name in panic. The message was clear: no interest in games from those who sought his destruction. Marquis Belfort entered Valhalla's grand hall carrying a wooden box. He presented it to the Emperor, explaining Roman Dmitri's message. Count Bragan was dead. Roman hadn't just rejected their terms, he'd severed the Count's head and returned it. The Emperor showed no surprise, resting his chin on his hand with detached indifference. The court erupted in outrage. One official demanded immediate military action, crush Duke Vieto's rebels first, then ally with Kronos against Dmitri. Count Gomez of the Conservative Party intervened. He noted Roman's meeting with Sanchez proved his rebel support. Gomez proposed a psychological approach, exploiting Valhalla's pure blood ideology and warrior pride. Public sentiment would turn against rebels if Roman, an outsider, dominated their liberation. Gomez requested permission to contact Roman directly, baiting him into recorded proof of interference that could sway public opinion. Marquis Belfort supported the plan. The Emperor dismissed them with a wave, leaving Gomez with a predatory smile. In a darkened chamber, Gomez activated a communication crystal. Roman's holographic image appeared. Gomez referenced the gift, questioning if brutality defined Dmitri ways and warning their relationship was irreparably broken. Roman called his words amusing, reminding Gomez that Valhalla attempted assassination first. Compromise was never possible. Gomez acknowledged Roman's rise from Cairo, but warned against overstepping. Gomez activated a hidden recorder, mocking Roman's rebel support as insufficient against Valhalla. Roman countered, What did Duke Vieto's actions have to do with him? He'd already stated his position clearly. Roman dismissed Valhalla's civil war as unimportant. The real issue was their arrogance. Gomez realized the recording captured Roman's personal contempt, not political alliance, useless for propaganda. Roman presented one path to restoration. The Valhalla Emperor must personally visit and seek forgiveness. An official screamed in outrage at the demand. Roman ignored the outburst. Dmitri now officially recognized Valhalla as a hostile state. The crystal went dark. Marquis Belfair acknowledged they'd fallen into Roman's trap. His cunning exceeded simple schemes. Belfair studied the strategic map. Kingdom of Hector between them would grant Roman passage to Valhalla's northern border. He ordered immediate northern military deployment to avoid a pincer attack with internal rebels. A messenger delivered catastrophic news. Duke Vieto's rebels assaulted Hernan's city. The fortified walls lay in ruins as rebels poured through breaches. Duke Vieto led personally, axe-cleaving imperial guards effortlessly. Amid burning streets, Vieto addressed soldiers and citizens. He offered surrender terms, promising to restore Valhalla's true warrior glory, tarnished by the current regime. At rebel suppression headquarters, Count Gomez stared at tactical maps, reeling from Hernan's rapid fall. He ordered mobilization of Valhalla's top warriors, except Caesar by the Emperor, to crush the rebellion decisively. He identified Buleras as Vieto's main threat. Concentrating elite forces offered quickest victory. A night burst in. Top warriors couldn't mobilize. They'd been summoned to a decisive battle. Gomez paled. Valhalla's sacred tradition bound top warriors to death matches, superseding military orders even during war. He demanded who initiated it. The night revealed Ars, third-ranked, challenged Alvarez, second-ranked, to battle. Gomez stared blankly. Valhalla's two greatest assets would fight each other to the death, removed from battlefields precisely when Roman's war declaration activated. Perfect chaos at the worst moment. An imperial summon was issued, and the strongest fighters of Valhalla gathered in the capital. But this meeting didn't feel normal at all. There was tension in the air, and everyone knew the reason behind it. Roman Dmitri. Alvarez, the rank 2 fighter of Valhalla, looked around in frustration. To him, this wasn't the same Valhalla anymore. One by one, their strongest warriors had fallen. Morales was gone, then Barbossa, and even Roderick couldn't survive. And on top of that, Ares, who was rank 3, had chosen to follow Roman Dmitri and left Valhalla behind. For them, this situation was completely unacceptable. Just then, the doors slowly opened, and Ares himself walked in. He looked completely calm, as if nothing had changed. He casually greeted everyone, which only made the situation more tense. Alvarez immediately got irritated. He couldn't understand how someone they considered a traitor could walk in here with so much confidence. But Ares didn't see himself as a traitor. As far as he was concerned, he was still rank 3 of Valhalla, and without wasting any time, he directly challenged Alvarez to a deciding duel. The entire room went silent. A deciding duel wasn't just a normal fight. It was a sacred tradition among the top-ranked fighters. Some of the members tried to interfere, especially those ranked below Ares, but he made it very clear that no one below his rank had the right to step in. This wasn't something they could interrupt. After a brief moment of silence, Alvarez accepted the challenge. The scene then shifted to the Valhalla Temple, where the duel was about to begin. As both fighters stood facing each other, Alvarez spoke confidently. He reminded Ares that history always repeats itself and that Ares had already lost to him multiple times before. But instead of reacting, Ares simply smiled, as if none of that mattered anymore. The duel finally began, and in the very next moment both of them rushed forward. Their swords clashed again and again, creating powerful shockwaves. The intensity of their exchange left the spectators stunned. Even though Ares was holding his ground, most of them still believed that Alvarez had the upper hand. Alvarez admitted that Ares had improved a lot, and his swordsmanship was impressive. But according to him, the difference in their aura was something that could never be overcome. To prove his point, he launched a powerful attack. For a moment it looked like his sword had pierced through Ares, but it turned out to be just an afterimage. Ares had already moved. Seeing this, Alvarez realized that he could no longer hold back. He decided to end the fight with one final attack. His aura suddenly exploded, filling the entire area with overwhelming pressure. The spectators were forced to step back because of the sheer intensity. Then, Alvarez used his secret technique, explosion smash. The attack landed perfectly, and for a moment, he was sure that he had won. But the next second, something unexpected happened. From within the smoke, Ares walked out, completely unharmed. Before anyone could even react, Ares counterattacked instantly. His strike was fast and precise, and it was fatal. Alvarez's swords fell to the ground, and in the very next moment, even his arm was severed. Blood spread across the battlefield, and shock filled the faces of everyone watching. That's when the truth was revealed. Ares had reached an entirely new level. He had become a 6-star swordsman. From the very beginning of the fight, he had been holding back his true power. What followed was pure domination. Ares continued attacking without giving Alvarez any chance to recover. The spectators couldn't believe what they were seeing. The man they thought would win was completely overwhelmed. At the same time, one of the observers finally understood what was really going on. This wasn't just a random fight. This was part of Roman Dmitri's plan. He had already sent his forces to the northern front to separate the Emperor's army, and now he had used Ares to eliminate Alvarez. Everything had been calculated from the start. Realizing this, panic began to spread among them. They understood that if this continued, they would keep getting controlled by Roman's strategies. Left with no other option, they decided to abandon their own principles and take immediate action. An order was given to arrest Ares right then and there, but surprisingly, no one moved. Because deep down, everyone already knew things were no longer under their control, and with that, the balance of power had completely shifted, and this was only the beginning. Before the journey even begins, we hear the words of a man who already understood how dangerous this place had become. A loyal retainer recalls what his lord told him right before leaving for Valhalla, and those words don't sound like motivation. They sound like a warning. He says Valhalla has completely lost a warrior's pride. Think about that. A land built on strength, discipline, and respect for combat has now turned into something far darker. And then comes the most chilling part. He warns that even if someone wins a duel, even if they prove their strength fairly, there's still a chance they'll be attacked afterward. That's how broken the system is. Winning doesn't guarantee safety anymore. In fact, it might make you a target. And with that, the story sets a tense and uneasy tone, like something terrible is waiting just around the corner. And then suddenly everything explodes, not with battle, but with news. Ares has won. The duel of decision is over, and the result spreads across Valhalla faster than anyone could have imagined. This isn't just some quiet announcement either. It's broadcast using a magical communication device, meaning everyone sees it, everyone hears it, and no one can ignore it. Ares, a name that many didn't take seriously before, has now climbed to the position of the second strongest in all of Valhalla. That's not just impressive. That's terrifying. The reactions are immediate and intense. Some people are in complete shock. How did someone so young reach this level? Others are angry, especially those who feel their own positions are now threatened. You can almost feel the jealousy and fear mixing together. But at the same time, there are those who feel something different, pride. To them, Ares represents something rare. Proof that raw talent and determination can still break through even in a corrupt system. But Ares doesn't stop to enjoy his victory. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't hesitate. Instead, he does something that instantly shakes the entire power structure of Valhalla. He issues a challenge, not to just anyone, but to the very top. Caesar, the #1 ranked warrior, the man known as Valhalla's strongest swordsman, a figure whose reputation alone is enough to silence a room. And now Ares is standing there, openly declaring that he wants to fight him. This isn't just bold, it's explosive. And just like that, the entire political landscape is thrown into chaos. Nobles, officials, and warriors begin arguing, debating, analyzing every possible outcome. Some insist that Caesar's experience and reputation make him unbeatable. Others aren't so sure anymore. Because Ares isn't just some lucky challenger. He has already reached the 6-star aura realm. That level of power isn't normal. It's the kind of strength that can change the outcome of a battle, no matter who stands on the other side. And suddenly, the impossible doesn't seem so impossible anymore. But just as tensions reach their peak, the story takes a sharp turn. Because while Valhalla is busy arguing about duels and rankings, war has already begun. An urgent report arrives like a thunderclap. Dmitri has launched an attack on the northern front line, and far earlier than anyone expected. There's no time to prepare, no time to debate. The enemy is already moving. And this isn't a small force. An army of 100,000 soldiers is advancing toward Valhalla's most important defensive position. 100,000. Just imagining that number is enough to understand the scale of what's coming. This isn't pressure. This is overwhelming force. But the real danger isn't just the number of troops. It's who's leading them. Among the attackers are elite mages, flare mages and phoenix mages, specialists in destruction. Their strategy is brutally efficient. First, they unleash long-range magical bombardment to weaken the fortress. Then, once the defences start to crumble, the main force moves in for close combat. It's a perfect combination of range and power, and then comes the moment that makes everything worse. Felix steps forward, a master of the Phoenix Magic Tower, and with absolute confidence he declares that bringing down Valhalla's walls will take just 1 hour. 1 hour, not a day, not a prolonged siege, just 1 hour to destroy defences that were meant to protect against massive invasions. The defenders hear this, and for the first time, real urgency sets in. This isn't a battle they can casually hold. They're already on the clock. Still, Valhalla doesn't stand defenseless. The Mountain Magic Tower takes charge of the defense. Their specialty is protection, reinforcement, and endurance. Their master, Uir, leads a group of 100 mages, all focused on one mission: hold the line, block incoming attacks, strengthen the fortress. Buy as much time as possible. They estimate they can hold out for about 10 days. 10 days until the enemy can fully take control of key territory like Hernard. 10 days sounds like a plan. But plans don't always survive contact with reality. The attack begins. The sky erupts as waves of magical energy crash down onto the fortress. Explosions shake the ground. The defenders immediately activate their strongest protection, the stone shield, a massive magical barrier designed to absorb and resist even the most powerful attacks. At first, it works. The shield holds. For a moment it feels like, maybe, just maybe, they can survive this. But then, the attackers reveal something that changes everything. Dispel. A counter-magic designed to erase other magic completely, and its strength depends on one thing: the power difference between the caster and the target, and that's where the defenders realize they're in trouble. The enemy's dispel is faster, stronger, more precise. 50 mages working together with perfect coordination, tearing down magical defenses piece by piece. The defenders try to fight back. They even have more mages, 100 of them, but numbers don't matter when the enemy is simply better. Their dispels are too slow, their reactions too late, and then it happens, the moment that changes everything. The stone shield is destroyed, gone, just like that. A defense that was supposed to protect them from total destruction collapses under pressure, and with it, the confidence of the defenders shatters. Panic spreads, orders are shouted in desperation, emergency weapons are prepared, a flame cannon is brought forward. There's even talk of launching a wide-area multi-dispel to try and regain control. But deep down, everyone already knows the truth. They're losing, and what makes it even more terrifying is how fast it's happening. The attackers didn't just break through, they overwhelmed the defences in record time, and in the middle of all this chaos, one name stands out. Edvin, a young mage whose growth is described as abnormal, rapid, unnatural. His progress suggests something even more dangerous, that the enemy isn't just strong, they're evolving at a speed no one can match. And that realization hits harder than any attack, because it means this gap will only get worse. Above the battlefield, Edwin Hector raised his magic with calm precision. Though once known for leadership, he now stood among the Allied forces as a pure mage, fully committed to his role. While Felix prepared overwhelming offensive spells, Edwin focused on dismantling the enemy's foundation, relentlessly casting Dispel to break Valhalla's magical formations. His mental strength expanded outward, directly interfering with the opposing mages. Instead of clashing head-on with destructive power, Edwin targeted their ability to even cast spells. Following his lead, the Phoenix mages synchronized their actions, repeatedly using Dispel to suppress Valhalla's magic before it could take shape. This strategy reflected Roman Dmitri's long-term vision. He had invested heavily in magical development, understanding that future wars would not be decided by brute force alone. Against fortified nations like Valhalla, magic would become the decisive weapon. Through constant refinement, Dmitri's forces had elevated their mages to a level far beyond ordinary limits. As a result, even though Valhalla's wizards outnumbered them, they struggled to keep up. The difference in skill was undeniable. Among them, Edwin Hector stood out the most. His control was overwhelming, breaking defensive spells in moments and forcing multiple enemy mages to focus on him alone, yet still failing to contain him. Despite coming from a nation not known for magic, Edwin's talent had grown to a level that even the highest authorities of magical knowledge had once desired. Each time he shattered the enemy's defenses, Felix and the other mages followed instantly with destructive spells. Their coordination was flawless. Dispel, then destruction. Flames erupted across the battlefield. Explosions echoed one after another, and the once stable magical defenses of Valhalla began to weaken. Smoke rose from the castle walls as the strain became visible. Inside, Hœnir urgently commanded repairs, trying to stabilize the collapsing defenses. He had been confident that the walls would hold without fail, but in less than an hour, that certainty was shattered. Valhalla's mages desperately poured their energy into maintaining the barrier, working together to restore what had been broken. Yet under Edwin's leadership, the relentless pressure continued. Piece by piece, their defenses were worn down. Then, finally, the wall collapsed. The impact shook the battlefield as the fortified barrier gave way, just as Felix had predicted. The path forward was now open. At that moment, the command rang out, "Advance." The Allied armies surged forward without hesitation, charging through the breach with overwhelming momentum. The battle had reached a turning point. Now, it was Roman Dmitri's move. Elsewhere, Count Gomez pushed forward with growing urgency. News of the northern front being attacked had unsettled him. Roman Dmitri's actions were far bolder than expected. Even with a massive force and the support of Valhalla's elite mages, Gomes believed the defense should have lasted at least 15 days. To him, the real deciding factor lay elsewhere, the outcome of the clash between Ares and Caesar. If Ares were to win, the situation would spiral beyond control. Still, Gomes held on to one assumption. With the Marquis of Killian and the mountain's mages guarding Valhalla, its fall should not come easily. He had not yet realized. The collapse had already begun. At the Temple of Valhalla, Ares stood still, waiting. He had already issued his challenge to Caesar, and now, under the watchful eyes of countless spectators, he remained calm and unmoving. The area was overflowing with people. What began as a staged gathering had turned into a massive crowd as rumours spread, drawing in citizens from all sides. Voices filled the air. Most believed Caesar would win without question. Others hesitated, recalling how Ares had already defeated Alvarez, something no one had expected. The uncertainty only fueled the tension. Through the dense crowd, Count Gomez made his way forward and took his reserved seat. His expression remained controlled, but his thoughts were restless. For Valhalla, this fight could not end in defeat. It wasn't just about Ares winning or losing. If Ares, who once failed to surpass Alvarez, had now risen to challenge the very peak after joining Roman Dmitri, then the meaning was clear. The credit would not belong to Ares alone. It would prove that Roman Dmitri had elevated him to an entirely new level, and that truth was difficult to ignore. Roman had already reshaped the very foundation of swordsmanship, surpassing even legends of the past. If Ares succeeded here, it would only strengthen that narrative. Then the moment arrived. The crowd split apart. Caesar appeared. Every step he took drew complete attention. Unlike the rough and imposing warriors of Valhalla, his presence was composed, almost refined. His appearance was clean and orderly, closer to that of a noble than a battlefield fighter. Only the massive claymore resting on his shoulder revealed his true nature. The weapon looked heavy and unforgiving, something no ordinary person could even lift, let alone wield with ease. He stopped in front of Ares. A faint smile formed on his face. He spoke as if recalling an old memory. 10 years ago, their paths had crossed. At the time, Ares was already a promising warrior, and for a brief moment he had the chance to learn from Caesar, the strongest swordsman in Valhalla. It had not been a formal bond of master and disciple, but Ares had respected him deeply and listened to his guidance. That short encounter had made one thing clear. The gap between them was overwhelming, and in Caesar's eyes that gap still remained. He spoke with confidence, even regret, suggesting that Ares had wasted his potential by not fully following him back then. To Caesar, comparisons between himself and Alvarez were meaningless. Those who made such judgments simply didn't understand the true difference in power. With a single motion, he loosened the strap of his claymore and took it in one hand, as if its weight meant nothing. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A quiet pressure spread across the area. Caesar gave Ares one last chance to kneel, admit his mistake, and swear loyalty to Valhalla's emperor. If he did, Caesar was willing to spare him for the sake of the empire's future. But the moment the sword was drawn, the answer was already clear. Ares smiled. He acknowledged the past without hesitation. Yes, he had once learned from Caesar. Yes, he had always sought growth, no matter who the teacher was. That had never changed. But neither had his resolve. As he raised his own sword, the air between them sharpened. There was no intention of stepping back. Ares' smile slowly deepened as he faced Caesar. He spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. The time he had spent learning under Caesar had been short, only a few days. For Ares, that was always enough. Whenever he felt he had learned all he could from someone, he moved on without hesitation, and Caesar was no exception. People called him the greatest swordsman of Valhalla, yet Ares had never stayed long enough to be shaped by him. To Ares, growth didn't come from clinging to one master, it came from constantly moving forward. Then his tone shifted slightly. What truly amused him wasn't the past, but the present. Even after all this time, Caesar had remained within Valhalla. Meanwhile, Ares had left and found something far greater in Roman Dmitri. After returning from Arcadia, Ares had only a week to prepare for the coming conflict. It was an impossible task. He was expected to face both Alvarez and Caesar, the two strongest pillars of Valhalla. He intended to carry out the mission alone. But before that, Roman Dmitri called him to the training ground. What stood out immediately was the weapon in Roman's hands. It wasn't the sword he was known for. Instead, he held a pair of ordinary-looking blades. Yet Ares understood instantly. Those swords resembled Alvarez's style. Without wasting time, Roman told him to draw his weapon. From that moment, Roman himself would become his opponent. This wasn't reckless training. It was preparation. Roman knew that Ares's mission required overwhelming strength, not just skill. Instead of pushing him blindly into danger, he chose to refine Ares to the point where success was possible. For Ares, it was exactly what he had wanted, a chance to face Roman Dmitri at full strength. But the outcome was absolute. Again and again, Ares was thrown to the ground. Despite his reputation as a genius swordsman, despite countless battles that had shaped his instincts, he couldn't gain the upper hand even once. Each exchange only widened the gap. Roman's dual sword technique reached a level Ares had never imagined. Every movement was precise, every strike unavoidable. It wasn't just strength, it was control, experience, and something beyond both. At some point, Ares realized something unsettling. He couldn't even picture a way to win. It reminded him of the past, of when he first faced Caesar 10 years ago. Back then, the difference between them had been overwhelming as well. But even then, Ares believed it was a gap that could be closed with time. Caesar was strong, but not unreachable. Roman Dmitri was different. Facing him felt like standing before an endless wall. For the first time, Ares understood that surpassing someone might take not just years, but an entirely different level of existence. Then Roman changed his approach. He switched to a claymore. Even though Ares was already exhausted, he couldn't help but laugh at what came next. Roman said he would now raise the level further and fight him the way Caesar would. That day, Ares experienced something completely beyond his world. And standing now before the real Caesar, that experience had already changed everything. There was no need for further words. At Ares's calm but provocative remarks, Caesar's expression hardened. The brief trace of anger on his face said enough. This was no longer a conversation, it was a test of strength. The priest of Valhalla stepped forward and declared the start of the duel. In the next instant, Caesar moved first. His aura erupted violently as he closed the distance in a single burst, embodying the overwhelming, relentless style he was known for. There was no hesitation in his approach, only pressure, meant to crush his opponent before they could react. But as Ares faced that charge, his mind recalled something else. Roman Dmitri's training. Caesar's strength was built on dominance, constant attacks, leaving no room to breathe. And the answer to that kind of opponent had already been shown to him. Meet force with certainty. The first clash shook the ground. Steel collided with a deafening impact, and from that moment on, Caesar didn't stop. His attacks came one after another, each heavier than the last, each carrying enough force to overwhelm an ordinary warrior instantly. Explosions of aura filled the air. Unlike his fight with Alvarez, Ares unleashed his full power from the beginning. His 6-star aura surged outward, matching Caesar's intensity. Even so, the sheer weight behind Caesar's strikes couldn't be ignored. Every blow rattled his body. And yet, there was no fear. Compared to what he had faced during training, this pressure felt manageable. Caesar was fast. His attacks were powerful, but they were still slower and lighter than what Ares had endured against Roman Dmitri. That difference changed everything. Ares remained calm, reading each movement, blocking with precision. Then, in a brief opening between attacks, he struck back. A single counter. Caesar barely avoided it, but the moment alone was enough to shake him. For the first time, his expression twisted, not from effort, but from wounded pride. He attacked again, even more aggressively. To the spectators, it was overwhelming. Even the rankers of Valhalla, watching the duel, knew they wouldn't last long under such pressure. Caesar's relentless style left no space, no escape, but Ares endured. He was pushed back, his body shaken, blood rising to his throat, but he didn't break. Instead, he smiled. Caesar stood at the peak of Valhalla. His strength was undeniable, but beyond that peak, Ares had already seen something greater. Roman Dmitri. Compared to that overwhelming presence, Caesar's attacks no longer felt absolute. They were powerful, but not unreachable. That realization became Ares' confidence. Enraged, Caesar gathered his mana all at once. The air around him twisted as black and red energy surged violently, wrapping around his blade like a storm. This was no longer a test. It was a killing strike. The ground trembled as the power condensed, lightning-like energy tearing through the surroundings. Die! The attack came down with devastating force, and in that moment Ares looked up calmly. His mind didn't waver. Instead, it returned to the path he had chosen, the teachings he had received. He raised his mana, guided by the Sura method, and for an instant he remembered the ideal that stood far above everything. The heavenly demon sword, a power he could not yet replicate, but one that showed him exactly where to go next. The instant his sword swings forward, a sudden realization reaches him. Without hesitation, he draws upon the heavenly demon sword art and forces a blazing green aura around his blade. Power surges across the steel, expanding into a massive energy edge that illuminates the dark arena walls. Ares had always been praised as a gifted swordsman, but even he had never imagined releasing strength on this level. It is only an imitation of the true technique, a mere shadow of the original art, yet the pressure alone is overwhelming. He gathers everything into one strike. The giant blade of energy crashes downward with enough force to shake the Colosseum. Caesar, caught completely off guard, can only stare as the attack descends. Even though it carries only a fraction of the heavenly demon's real power, it is still more than enough to break through him entirely. The impact explodes across the battlefield. Caesar's defense shatters at once, fragments scattering through the air as he is overwhelmed in a single blow. Silence follows the destruction. Ares looks at what he has done and understands the gap clearly. This is not the true sword art, only a rough imitation, but instead of disappointment he feels excitement. If this incomplete version carries such force, then his own growth has only just begun. Above the arena, a hooded announcer struggles to steady his voice as he reveals the result. Ares has defeated Caesar. With that victory, he rises to first place in the Valhalla rankings. The crowd erupts. Thunderous cheers fill the Colosseum, and through the blue light of the live broadcast, the entire kingdom witnesses the fall of one ruler and the rise of another. Far away, the king of Valhalla watches in silence. The blonde monarch clenches his jaw, unable to hide his anger. Disgust crosses his face as he turns away from the screen before the celebration can continue. His cloak snaps behind him as he leaves the throne room, each step echoing through the corridor. Back in the arena, Ares stands beneath the roar of the crowd, but he shows no interest in their praise. His face hardens. He raises his damaged sword high and calls for everyone's attention. His voice spreads through the Colosseum and across the live transmission. From this moment onward, he declares that he will step down as a Valhalla ranker. The cheers die instantly. Shock replaces celebration. The arena falls into confusion as thousands struggle to understand why the newly crowned #1 would abandon the highest position the same day he earned it. Ares gives them no time to recover. He reminds the Empire that 10 years earlier, Caesar had stood at the summit without equal. Back then, no swordsman in Valhalla could challenge him. But the truth is simple. Since then, Caesar has not advanced at all. The man who once chased greater mastery was slowly consumed by comfort. Authority, political influence, and wealth replaced the hunger that once made him strong. Ares' words strike harder than any blade. He declares that the moment a warrior begins depending on borrowed power, pride starts to disappear. And when pride is lost, the sword follows the same path. Like steel abandoned to rust in the dirt, it eventually breaks apart and becomes worthless. Then his tone lowers. He says Caesar's growth ended the day he abandoned that pride. And because the strongest man in Valhalla stopped moving forward, the nation itself remained frozen beside him. Ares lifts his head again, calm but unshaken. He tells the people they are free to call him a traitor for abandoning the rank he just earned. It does not matter. Pressing a fist against his chest, he speaks the only identity he will ever accept. He was born a warrior, and he will die as one. With complete conviction, Ares admits that only now, standing beside Roman Dmitri, does he feel truly alive again. Having said everything he came to say, he turns his back on the arena. The title, the applause, and the highest seat in Valhalla mean nothing to him now. But before leaving, he gives the Empire one final command: never forget your roots. He reminds every citizen that the blood of warriors still runs through them, whether they acknowledge it or not. His enormous projected image still hovers above the capital, and his voice echoes through the streets. People stop where they stand, staring upward in silence as his message spreads across the city. Many cannot answer the question rising in their minds. When had Valhalla changed? For generations, the kingdom had taken pride in being a nation of fighters. Strength, courage, and discipline were once its foundation. Yet Ares' departure forces everyone to face what they have become. Even the ranking system they honor so highly was built from that same warrior spirit. But Caesar, the symbol of Valhalla itself, has fallen in humiliation before the eyes of the world. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Lucas of the House faction speaks what many already know. If Ares had not chosen loyalty to the enemy of the imperial family, he would have been praised as Valhalla's greatest pride. Instead, a warrior of unmatched talent has rejected the nation entirely. To Lucas, the meaning is obvious. The moment Ares returned, defeated Caesar, and walked away, he proved that his decision to follow Roman Dmitri was the correct one. That realization passes through the streets like a wave. Citizens quietly admit that ever since Ares chose Dmitri's side, Valhalla itself has stopped growing. Then, as uneasy murmurs fill the city, a firm set of footsteps strikes the stone road and silences the noise at once. Lucas steps forward and faces the restless crowd. His voice carries open contempt as he forces their hidden frustration into the open. He asks whether this is truly the Valhalla they are proud of now, a nation where useless men who can barely handle a sword walk with authority as if they own the empire. His words break the last barrier holding the people back. A man from the crowd shouts in response and places the blame directly on the throne. He condemns the foolish 14th prince, saying an ignorant ruler has no right to command the nation simply because stronger figures protect him. The mood in the streets changes at once. Shock and confusion are replaced by anger. Faces harden, jaws tighten, and years of suppressed resentment finally surface. What had once been whispered in private is now spoken aloud without fear. Then those emotions find direction. With Duke Vito already leading resistance against the corrupt royal family, and with Dmitri openly supporting that cause, the citizens begin to believe rebellion is no longer impossible. The fire spreads quickly. People decide they can no longer stand by while Valhalla decays from within. One man raises his voice above the rest and calls for action. If Duke Vito has made his stand, then it is time for the people to risk their own lives for Valhalla as well. Ares's defiance becomes the spark. His victory, his rejection of the ranking system, and his loyalty to Dmitri ignite the hearts of the people and turn growing resentment into open rebellion. Far from the streets, the atmosphere inside Valhalla's command center is far colder. Senior commanders stand over a large war map, studying the sudden collapse of stability across the empire. One strategist admits that he had long expected Roman Dmitri to become a major threat. Now, he says, the situation has passed the point of political conflict. This is war. He warns that whichever side loses its resolve first will be destroyed entirely. Count Gaiman anxiously asks if that means they will have to abandon the northern front. The strategist corrects him at once. They will not give it up completely, only sacrifice part of it. He explains that Dmitri's plan is clear. Ares has been used as a decisive weapon to occupy Valhalla's highest-ranked warriors. While the Empire's strongest fighters are distracted, Dmitri can pressure the north and prevent the army from fully suppressing the rebellion inside the kingdom. Even while recognizing the strategy, the commander remains arrogant. He argues that the Allied forces under Dmitri number only around 100,000 soldiers, far too few to topple the Valhalla Empire. Marquis Belfair dismisses the northern offensive as a diversion. In his view, Dmitri's true objective is to secretly strengthen the rebellion in Hernand. But Count Gaiman does not look convinced. His unease only deepens. Under growing pressure, he asks the question no one wants to hear. What if Roman Dmitri breaks through the northern defences completely and pushes deeper into Valhalla? A cold smile forms on Marquis Belfair's face. He calmly explains that even if the north collapses, Valhalla still has options. They only need to shift the political balance of the continent in their favour. Count Gaiman immediately understands. Because of the current truce, the Kronos Empire cannot openly join the war, but they can still move their forces toward the Cairo border and create enormous pressure through threat alone. If that happens, Dmitri will be forced to divide his attention. Relief replaces Gaiman's fear. He praises Belfair's thinking and calls it the perfect solution for Valhalla. But before their confidence can settle, the doors of the command center burst open. A messenger rushes inside with an urgent report from the northern front. His expression alone is enough to silence the room. He tells Belfair that the situation is too serious for words and that he needs to witness it himself. At the center of the chamber, the blue communication crystal activates. A live projection appears above it, but instead of an orderly battlefield report, the image shows a wounded northern commander barely able to stand. Covered in blood and shaking with fear, he forces out a final message. The North has already fallen to Roman. The moment he finishes speaking, his body collapses. Then a figure steps forward from the darkness behind him. Roman Dmitri enters the crystal's view. His presence alone changes the room. Calm, cold, and completely in control, he looks directly into Valhalla's command center through the projection. Roman says Marquis Belfair is a disappointment. He reminds them that Count Bragan's severed head was sent as both a warning and a message. Yet despite that, this weak resistance is all Valhalla had prepared. The faces of the strategists turn pale. Only now does the truth fully strike them. The northern line was not merely attacked. It has already been conquered. Roman remains composed as he delivers his next words with absolute certainty. He has no interest in prolonging the war. If they drag the Emperor of Valhalla before him and force him to kneel immediately, then he will end the conflict. The insult shatters Belfair's restraint. He explodes in rage and shouts back at the projection. Pointing at the crystal, he reveals what he believes is Valhalla's hidden advantage. Kronos forces are already gathering at the Cairo border. Whatever Roman plans, he claims, will soon become meaningless. He swears to send troops at once, crush the Hernan rebels, and erase Dmitri from the continent entirely. Belfair continues shouting in fury. He declares that Roman will soon learn the fear of facing two great powers at once. When Kronos and Valhalla move together, he claims, no force on the continent will be able to resist them. Roman shows no reaction. He calmly steps over the broken armor and bodies scattered across the captured northern battlefield. His voice returns through the crystal as cold and steady as before. He says he has heard Valhalla's intentions clearly. Then a faint smile appears on his face, not from concern but amusement. To Roman, the threats coming from the command room mean nothing. Standing in the aftermath of total victory, he looks directly into the projection and mocks Belfair's confidence. He admits that even he had not expected Valhalla's northern defences to collapse so easily. Their carelessness, he says, has opened the road for him. Roman makes it clear that he will continue advancing without pause, cutting through every obstacle until the war is completely decided. He tells Belfair to keep that same arrogance until the very end. A heavy killing intent spreads around Roman's figure, so intense that even through the projection it sends fear into the command room. Belfair, moments earlier full of confidence, now stands drenched in sweat. Roman's expression sharpens into a grim smile. When everything is over, he promises, they will meet him face to face, and this time, no distance or strategy will protect them. The communication has been cut, the room is silent, and the reality of the situation is settling in like cold iron. Marquis Belfair and Count Gomez are not men who break easily, but right now neither of them is hiding it. They're rattled. Gomez lays it out plainly. 100,000 troops pushing toward Valhalla's capital should be impossible. By any conventional measure it is. But Roman Dmitri doesn't fight by conventional measures. The man carved his legend in the war with Kronos, capturing fortified positions that should never have fallen, leaving nothing behind but ash and reputation. Even if his force is small, Belfair and Gomez know the damage he would inflict before anyone could stop him would be catastrophic. Belfair reaches his decision. There's only one move left. He has to go directly to the Emperor. In the Valhalla Empire, there is one rule above all others. You do not seek an audience with the Emperor unless he calls for you. Those who have broken that rule in the past didn't get the chance to regret it. Belfair and Gomez know this. They walk into the Imperial Palace anyway. The throne room is vast and cold. The Emperor is somewhere in the distance, draped in indifference. But as the two commanders reach the steps of the throne and drop to their knees, something shifts. The weight of what they've just done crashes over both of them. Sweat soaks through their composure. Their bodies are trembling before a single word is spoken. The Emperor rises. He approaches slowly. His footsteps echo through the hall with quiet, deliberate menace. He speaks Belfir's name. What follows is not a trial, it's a statement. Before Belfir can even finish answering, the Emperor strikes him, a backhanded blow so forceful it snaps his head sideways and rings off the stone walls. Then a second strike, then a third, each one harder than the last, until Belfir is coughing blood on the floor of the imperial throne room. Count Gomez watches in silent horror, unable to move. Standing over the broken marquee, the Emperor doesn't rage. He's almost calm, and that makes it worse. He reminds them both why they were given power in the first place, so they wouldn't become a burden to him. And yet here they are, crawling into his presence with news of failure. Then he says something unexpected. He admits he has never truly liked anyone born in Valhalla. Their warrior pride, their ancient traditions, their talk of strength and honor. He calls it the noise of people who are too weak to face reality. What comes next is the chapter's most revealing moment. The Emperor confesses that when he looks at Roman Dmitri, he is reminded of something from his own past. A time when arrogant voices rejected him, the rightful heir, and tried to force him into submission under the weight of imperial tradition. He hated those people. But Roman Dmitri, a commoner from the Empire's outer rim who has built himself into Valhalla's most dangerous enemy, the Emperor doesn't hate him the same way. He almost respects it. He says Roman has grasped the true, ruthless nature of what Valhalla is, better than most people born inside it ever did. That dark amusement lasts for exactly a moment. Then the Emperor snaps. Another brutal flurry of strikes rains down on Belfir, and somewhere in the middle of it a new strategy takes shape in the Emperor's mind. His order is short and absolute. March on Hernard, leave no one alive. Belfir and Gomez, barely able to stand, shout their obedience and scramble to carry it out. The Emperor covers his face with one hand, smiling. He poses one final question to the empty room, to Roman Dmitri, wherever he is. What will your choice be? The next morning, Valhalla's war machine is already moving. One of the continent's most powerful armies marches straight for Hernard, and every step of it is reported directly back to Roman Dmitri. Inside his command tent, his second-in-command, Chris, raises the obvious concern. They know the Imperial army is coming. Is Roman certain he wants to continue? Roman doesn't hesitate. He explains it clearly. The moment he took Count Brigand's head, he stepped into a game with only two outcomes. There's no retreating from this. Without Dmitri's military pressure, the Hernard rebellion collapses. And if Hernard falls, Roman finds himself trapped between two massive empires simultaneously, Valhalla and Kronos, with no room to breathe. This war, he tells Chris, runs entirely on momentum. The side that stops first loses everything. He leans over the war map and points to three territories, Lunos, Port Bell and Santino. These three strongholds form the shortest path to Valhalla's capital, and beyond Santino sits something even more valuable, a major warp point that would give Dmitri instant strike capability anywhere within Valhalla's borders, including the capital itself. His timeline: capture all three within 1 week, and they become the most dangerous force Valhalla has ever had to face. Roman's expression doesn't waver. He's already issued his silent challenge to the Emperor. Now he waits to see if the Emperor truly understands what he's walking into. The scene shifts to Lunos. Viscount Lunos stands on his fortress walls, watching Roman's army arrive. He has direct orders from the Emperor. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to hold long enough to buy the capital a few extra days. But day one passes. No siege. Roman's army simply camps outside the gates. Soldiers queue for hot meals and rest in shifts. It's almost relaxed. By day 2, Viscount Lunos is losing his composure. Why aren't they attacking? Is this even a siege? He tries to rationalize it. No army of 100,000 can realistically take an empire. There must be a limit to what Roman can do. Then a messenger arrives, gasping for breath. Port Bell is under attack by Roman himself. Right now, Port Bell is located entirely behind Lunos's position. If Roman is personally leading an assault there, then what exactly is the army camped in front of the fortress walls? The realization hits like a physical blow. Lunos had been watching a decoy the entire time. 3 days earlier, inside the rebel camp, Duke Vieto received the news of the Northern Front's collapse and the deaths of Alvarez and Caesar. The losses are severe. But one of his commanders, Sanchez, a follower of Morales, isn't surprised. He had predicted Roman's return. He reminds the Duke that even when the Valhalla imperial family sent assassins after Roman, the man came back on his own terms, victorious. Duke Vieto refocuses on their role in all of this. The rebellion cannot topple Valhalla by force alone. What it can do is spread truth, show the people of Valhalla that change is possible, that the imperial family's grip is not unbreakable. Every day they hold out, the message gets louder. With Roman keeping the imperial army occupied, the emperor can't dedicate his full focus to crushing them. If the rebels can survive 15 more days, Vieto believes the people will rise. But the Emperor of Valhalla has already made his own calculation. Having abandoned the northern front entirely to Roman's advance, he redirects a staggering 1,000,000-strong army, led by his personal elite force, the Royal Knights, directly to Hernard. The intent is total annihilation. Not a siege, not a negotiation. The complete and permanent end of the rebellion. A Hernard commander looks at the incoming force and can barely form the words. How are they supposed to stop that? The answer, for now, is that they can't. 2 generals, 2 colossal armies. And in the middle of it all, Roman Dmitri playing a game of war that nobody else has fully read yet. The Emperor thinks he's closing the trap. Roman thinks he's already sprung his. Which one of them is right? The Emperor of Valhalla has made his move, and it's not a siege, it's an execution. But while Hernard braces for total annihilation, Roman Dmitri is playing an entirely different game. An ocean of silver and black armor stretches across the horizon, a seemingly endless column of imperial soldiers marching in perfect formation toward the fortress of Hernard. At the head of this procession, the Emperor's elite royal knights lead the advance, their golden banners snapping violently in the wind. Standing on the battlements, Duke Vito takes one long look at the approaching force and goes quiet. His veteran's eye does the cold math immediately. Their numbers easily push past several 100,000, and at the front, that golden standard confirms the worst. The Royal Knights have been fully mobilized. Beside him, Sanchez breaks into a cold sweat, confirming what the intelligence reports already warned. This is the Emperor's entire army. The picture sharpens quickly. The Emperor of Valhalla has not split his forces to deal with the threat on the northern front. Instead, he has committed everything, a force of over 1 million, to crush the rebellion at Hernard before Roman Dmitri can arrive and complicate the situation. Duke Vito understands the logic immediately. This isn't just a military campaign. This is a preemptive extermination. The Emperor wants the rebel army gone before any unpredictable variables enter the equation. He wants it over fast, and he wants it permanent. The Duke does not flinch outwardly, but the numbers are beyond argument. His own force of 200,000 has no realistic path to surviving a 1,000,000-strong imperial assault, let alone holding for the 15 days the rebels originally planned. The grim question forming in his mind isn't whether they can win, it's whether they can survive even a single week. The tense standoff shatters without warning. Massive fireballs arc into the sky from Hernard's siege weapons, leaving trails of scorching light as they crash into the fortress's magical barrier. The ground shakes. The air fills with heat and noise. Duke Vito steadies himself against the shockwaves, watching the defensive barrier absorb blow after blow, and wondering how long it can last. The answer comes quickly. The Emperor hasn't just sent soldiers and siege weapons. Emerging from the imperial ranks are the vagabond mages, dark-robed practitioners from one of Valhalla's most feared magic towers. Duke Vito can barely believe the Emperor would deploy them here, but there they are. The vagabond mages raise their hands in unison and release a combined assault spell, a catastrophic mixture of lightning, driving rain and a howling wind field that hammers into Hernard's magical barrier with devastating force. Sanchez and Duke Vito are physically shoved back by the pressure. The barrier begins to strain. Duke Vito arrives at a grim conclusion. Under this level of continuous magical bombardment, the fortress will eventually fall. It is only a matter of time. Sensing the defense beginning to buckle, the Imperial Vanguard commander signals his advance. Count Gomez personally orders the ground troops forward. Siege ladders crash onto the fortress walls. The swarm reaches the gates. Duke Vito screams at his men to hold the line because they have no other choice. If Hernard falls, the rebellion ends here. The future they're fighting for dies with it. The scene cuts away from the chaos of Hernard, far away to where the real gambit is unfolding. 6 days into the diversionary operation, Roman Dmitri's forces have arrived at the fortress of Santino. Roman doesn't bring out a siege engine. He doesn't form his troops into attack formations. He simply walks up to the base of the fortress wall alone, states his name clearly, and issues a direct challenge to the Lord of Santino, a one-on-one duel. High on the battlements, Count Santino's face goes pale. The rumours about this man are not rumours. Even among the elite warriors of Valhalla, Roman Dmitri is known as the man who killed Barbossa single-handedly. Santino knows, with absolute certainty, that stepping outside those gates to face Roman in a fair fight would mean his death. He refuses. He shouts down that Roman's intentions are obvious, a quick psychological trick to end the siege early, and that he won't fall for it. He's buying time. He's hoping Roman goes away. Roman doesn't go away. He mocks the Count openly. He calls out the entire empire, asking out loud what has happened to Valhalla's famous pride as a nation of warriors who never back down from a challenge. Then he raises the stakes. He offers to fight Santino and all of his elite guards at the same time, and promises he won't take a single step back from where he's standing. It's a masterclass in psychological pressure, and it works, but not in the way Roman needs. Santino still refuses to open the gates. Roman pauses for a moment, then simply decides to go up himself. He reaches into his cloak, produces a magical scroll, and activates a flight spell. Wings of pure, glowing energy burst from his back, and he launches into the stormy sky, heading straight for the top of the fortress wall. Santino erupts in panic. He orders every archer to fire. A thick storm of arrows fills the air above Roman, but a golden-haired mage at the base of the wall raises her hand and conjures a fire shield that burns through the entire volley before it reaches him. Roman clears the wall and lands. The impact is not subtle. The stone battlements shatter beneath him in an explosion of blue magical energy. When the dust settles, the area around him is wrecked. Cratered stone, and the elite guards who were stationed there already defeated. Before Santino can process what just happened, a gloved hand shoots out of the clearing smoke and closes around his face. Roman lifts the Count off his feet with one arm, fixes him with a cold stare, and gives a single order to the surviving soldiers watching in stunned silence. Contact the Imperial family and tell the Emperor that Count Santino is in danger. Somewhere deep in a quiet Imperial office, a communication crystal begins to glow. Marquis Belelfa, a senior Valhalla official, picks it up calmly and listens as Santino's voice comes through, trembling, barely coherent, describing what has just happened. The mighty fortress has been breached. Roman Dmitri is standing right in front of him. They need reinforcements immediately. There is a long silence on the other end. When Marquis speaks, his tone is not shock. It is not alarm. It is cold, deliberate, and completely unmoved. He tells Santino that Imperial reinforcements will only be dispatched after the rebellion at Hernard has been fully crushed. Santino breaks. He begs, he pleads, he demands to know how he's supposed to stop someone like Roman Dmitri on his own. His desperation bleeds through the crystal, raw and humiliating. The Marquis cuts him off, warning him not to test his patience. And then Santino's voice goes silent. A single, brutal strike ends the transmission. Roman Dmitri has ended the Count's life without hesitation. Through the glowing crystal, Marquis delivers his final verdict in a voice that carries no guilt whatsoever. Santino's death, he says, is a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of Valhalla. The Empire did not abandon him. They offered him up deliberately, and Roman Dmitri simply accepted. 2 fronts, 2 stories, One's strategy. At Hernard, the rebels are fighting to survive against impossible odds, buying time with everything they have. And at Santino, Roman Dmitri has just demonstrated exactly why the Emperor was so desperate to finish the war before he arrived. The next chapter promises to push both of these battles further. Whether Duke Vito's lines hold and what Roman does next now that Santino is taken, that's where this story goes. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Count Santino is alive. Roman Dmitri spared him deliberately, severing the communication crystal before the Marquis of Belfier could order the Count's execution through the link. With that line cut, Santino is confronted with a brutal truth. His own empire had already written him off as a disposable piece. That realization does more damage than any blade could. Stripped of dignity and loyalty in the same moment, Santino collapses into desperation. He begs, he offers everything. His title, his honor, whatever remains, just to stay alive. Roman doesn't answer with words. He throws the man to the stone floor and stands over him with a single cold demand. Give me something worth keeping you alive for. Santino's mind races. He lands on the one card he has left. He reveals classified military intelligence on the Javier Warp Gate, the heavily defended strategic point that Roman's entire campaign is built around capturing. He explains the hidden weaknesses in its magical defenses, troop rotations, and blind spots. He makes the case that without this inside knowledge, taking Javier would be nearly impossible. He finishes, looks up, and with a shaking voice, asks if that's finally enough to earn his life. Roman's response is a smile, not a reassuring one. He tells Santino plainly, the information isn't enough. Before the Count can even curse him, Roman strikes. One clean, decisive blow ends Count Santino's story on the battlements of his own fortress. Far from the battlefield in Marin, the capital of Valhalla, something rare is happening. The people have had enough. The desperate resistance of Duke Vieto's rebel army inside Hernard has sent a shockwave through the civilian population. Watching ordinary soldiers fight to the death for a cause larger than themselves lights something in the citizens that propaganda and fear had long suppressed. A massive crowd fills the grand square and begins marching towards the imperial palace. One civilian steps to the front and speaks for all of them. His words are measured but fierce. He reminds the Emperor that Valhalla was built on a warrior's code, on honor, strength, and pride. What sits on the throne now, he argues, is none of that. It is a regime sustained by shadows, manipulation, and the quiet disposal of anyone who asks too many questions. He pleads for a return to what Valhalla actually stands for. His voice carries across the square. For a moment it feels like something might shift. Then the palace doors open. The crowd holds its breath. The civilian leader turns back to the people with a flicker of hope in his eyes, believing the Emperor has heard them. He hasn't. The doors open not to dialogue, but to armoured soldiers moving in perfect formation. Before the civilian leader can finish his sentence, the lead knight steps forward and cuts him down without a word of warning. The knight then turns to the crowd and declares the protesters to be traitors, and orders his men to deal with them accordingly. The square turns to chaos. Screams replace chants. The imperial soldiers move through the defenceless crowd without hesitation. Dying on the cold stone steps, the civilian leader uses his last breath to name what he sees clearly. The Emperor of Valhalla has lost his mind to power. He warns that what happens here will not stay hidden. The rest of Valhalla will see this. The knight ends it with a single stroke. Then he justifies it simply. These were the Emperor's orders. Inside the pristine halls of the imperial palace, the contrast is jarring. While blood dries on the grand square's stones, Marquis Belfier delivers a tidy, emotionless report. The uprising has been suppressed, and any remaining connections to the rebellion will be tracked down. The Emperor listens from his throne, unbothered. He dismisses the slaughtered citizens as people who forgot their station. When the conversation turns to Roman Dmitri and Duke Vieto's strategy of using public sentiment as a weapon against the crown, the Emperor laughs at it. Not a performance, genuine contempt. He walks down the steps of the throne and reflects quietly. His own brothers once bet everything on the same card. Popular support, moral high ground, the will of the people. It didn't save them. They died for it. Tonight was simply history repeating itself. Then, almost as an afterthought, He gives Marquis Belfier a new instruction: contact Roman Dmitri. A magical projection flickers to life in the hall. Roman Dmitri's face appears, composed, unbothered, with a faint edge of dark humour. He greets the Emperor, noting the timing is convenient. The Emperor narrows his eyes. The projection expands. Behind Roman, the scale of the carnage becomes visible. Valhallan soldiers cover the ground as far as the image can show. Roman smiles at the Emperor across the magical link, letting the sight speak for itself. Marquis Belfier visibly recoils. He stares at the scope of the destruction and quietly marks Roman as something beyond rational calculation. The Emperor, however, laughs. He claps. He openly praises what Roman has done to his own forces, calling it genuinely impressive. He acknowledges that in all the opposition he has ever faced, Roman is the only one who has delivered real, measurable results. He even suggests, half serious, that Roman might have been a natural fit for Valhalla. Then he shifts. The praise becomes a trap. He lays out Roman's entire strategic framework: take Luenos, Port Bell and Santino in rapid succession, force Valhalla to pull its troops back to defend the Javier Warp Gate, and use that pressure to squeeze the imperial family. Clean, logical, effective, and completely irrelevant, because the Javier Warp Gate no longer exists. The Emperor destroyed it himself. By eliminating their own strategic asset, the Empire has neutralized Roman's entire endgame. Even if Roman takes Javier now, he can't use it. His forces are effectively cut off. The Emperor leans into the projection, eyes lit with something unhinged, and asks what Roman plans to do now that every option has been closed. He closes with a promise. When Roman finally falls, the Emperor intends to be there in person to see it. The transmission ends. The chapter closes at Hernard, where the siege has ground into its 10th brutal day. Count Gomez drives the imperial forces forward through pouring rain, declaring that today the rebel army ends. Soldiers swarm the fortress walls on siege ladders, and the vanguard begins to pour over the top. Duke Vieto meets them personally. He fights with everything he has, cutting down the first knight before the man can even raise his sword, sweeping through the imperial advance with the kind of force that comes from someone who has nothing left to protect but the ground beneath his feet. But he knows. The reserves are gone. The losses over 10 days have been too deep. He acknowledges to himself that holding out this long was already a miracle no one planned for. Surrounded, outnumbered, and fully aware that the math no longer works in his favour, Duke Vieto makes his choice. He does not order a retreat. He does not seek an exit. He faces the incoming wave of imperial soldiers and makes a vow: if this is where he dies, then this is where he dies. He will not turn his back. 2 days into the siege of Hernard, the walls are barely holding. Count Gomez oversees the assault from a safe distance, calm and precise. His imperial forces have been grinding the rebel defences down with ruthless efficiency. From his perspective, this is not a war, it is a controlled demolition. The rebels inside, led by Duke Vieto, have traded a life of comfort for a fight they cannot win, and Gomez sees no reason to rush what is already decided. Then his communication stone lights up, and everything changes. An urgent transmission comes through, carrying an order Gomez cannot make sense of: withdraw part of his forces from the siege, immediately. He pushes back hard, arguing that pulling troops now would be handing the barely alive rebels a miracle they have done nothing to earn. But the voice on the other end isn't asking. It belongs to the Emperor himself. The message is simple: obey or face the gallows. Gomes screams into the void as the transmission cuts off, demanding to know what could possibly justify abandoning a victory already in hand. The story rewinds to explain why the Empire is suddenly in a panic. In the grand central plaza of Marin, Marquis Belfier stands over a kneeling prisoner. The square is packed with citizens, surrounded by armoured imperial knights. Belfier is making an example, a public execution meant to crush any remaining spirit of dissent. He delivers his judgment coldly, reminding the crowd that treason carries only one outcome. The blade falls, blood stains the stone. He orders the next prisoner brought forward, but before the knight can comply, an emergency transmission intercepts him. His face goes pale as he relays the report to Belfier. Coordinated attacks have erupted across Valhalla simultaneously. Roman Dmitri has been moving in the shadows, and the Empire is under assault from within. The scene shifts east to the city of Cairo. A team of cloaked operatives moves across rooftops in silence. Their target is the Cairo Armory, a fortified imperial building guarded by fully armored knights who have no idea they are already dead. The strike is swift and without sound. The guards are neutralized before they can raise an alarm. A magical explosive device is attached to the iron doors, armed with a single click, and the operatives dissolve into the shadows. The explosion tears apart the night sky. Flames pour out of the armory, lighting the street below in orange and red. Citizens pour out of their homes in confusion and fear. And then, 3 cloaked figures step into view. They do not hide. They speak directly to the crowd, reminding them of the innocent people slaughtered in Meereen simply for speaking uncomfortable truths, warning that none of them are safe under the current emperor, urging them to stop waiting for rescue and take their homeland back themselves. The fear on the faces in the crowd slowly hardens into something else. Imperial reinforcements arrive, and the Knight Commander orders his men to pursue the operatives at all costs. The lead operative glances back, unbothered. Then, in a single explosive burst, the agents vanish into the alleyways using high-level movement techniques, leaving the knights standing in an empty street, baffled. These are not ordinary rebels. They are elite agents of the House Sect, masters of martial arts who have been operating in Valhalla's blind spots. Far from the chaos, Roman Dmitri sits motionless on a throne in the quiet city of Javier. His aide, Chris, stands at his side. A holographic battle report comes in. The psychological operation is working. Rebellions have broken out across eastern Valhalla. The northern granaries are on fire. The Empire is losing control of its own population. Chris notes that the Emperor has permanently lost the trust of his people, but then raises a tactical concern. If Valhalla can prove that Romans secretly orchestrated these uprisings, they could flip the narrative and use it to unify the public against him. Roman dismisses it without blinking. His calculation is different. The citizens are past the point of caring who lit the fire. They are already burning. What matters now is how the Emperor responds to the pressure, and Roman already knows how a cornered, unstable ruler responds. Chris hesitates, expressing unease about the civilian cost of this strategy. Roman cuts it off cleanly. Valhalla is not his nation. Dmitri's future is the only priority. He instructs Chris to activate the secondary plan they had prepared in advance. A cold smile crosses his face. The Emperor once wanted to know what Roman Dmitri was truly capable of. Now he is finding out. Inside Valhalla's imperial court, the reports arrive in waves. Armories destroyed, granaries burning, rebellions spreading. Commanders argue that they have no choice but to pull forces from the front just to stabilize the interior. One official stops and does the math, and the result is paralysis. If the army retreats, the Empire loses its grip on both the north and Hernard. If it doesn't, the interior collapses. Before anyone can decide, a knight bursts into the hall. Roman Dmitri is requesting a direct communication. Marquis Belfier steps forward to take the call, with the Emperor watching silently in the background. Belfier challenges Roman directly, warning that his actions are pushing the Empire toward total war and that the rebels in Hernard are already on the edge of collapse. Roman is unmoved. He confirms the two nations are now permanently on opposite sides of a line that cannot be uncrossed. Belfier presses harder. The rebels will be finished before sunset, and Roman's entire strategy has already failed. Then Roman delivers the final blow. He states calmly that he always knew 200,000 rebels could never topple the Valhalla Empire. Belfier goes quiet. Roman continues. Because the task was impossible from the start, he had already decided to abandon the rebels entirely. They were never the point. They were the board he needed to play on. The chapter closes with something far larger than a tactical reveal. Roman's shadow stretches across the landscape, not like a man, but like something ancient and uncontainable. His eyes glow with a pale violet light. His white hair moves in a wind that seems to exist only around him. He sheds every title, every constraint, and announces something that the world of this story has not yet been forced to fully reckon with. He is not simply Roman Dmitri, he is the ruler who once consumed the entire Central Plains with nothing but raw, unmatched force. He is the heavenly demon, and he has only just gotten started. The meeting had been going well enough, until it wasn't. With a smile that carried no warmth, Roman delivered the news that would shake Machiavelphia to his core. The alliance with the rebels was over. Not because of betrayal in the traditional sense, but because Roman had never considered it a real alliance to begin with. He laid it out plainly. When he first aligned with the rebel forces, there had been no loyalty, no trust, no shared cause. It was a transaction, nothing more. And now that Hernard was crumbling, that transaction had simply expired. What followed was worse than any outright betrayal. Roman explained with unsettling calm that his true purpose had been to use the stage the rebels created, to grind down Valhalla's military strength from the inside, let both sides tear each other apart, let the casualties mount. Because no matter who fell in the end, the Dmitri kingdom would be the one left standing to benefit. The communication device cut off before anyone could respond. Silence filled the imperial chamber. Then the cold sweat started. Machiavelphia's mind raced through every decision, every move, every moment he had felt even slightly in control, and the terrifying possibility crystallized. Had they been walking into Roman's trap from the very beginning? Belelphia turned to the emperor immediately, urging a full withdrawal. Pull the troops back, crush the rebellion before the situation deteriorated any further. The other ministers fell in line, bowing in unison, fear written plainly across their faces. The emperor's response was laughter, not nervous laughter, not the kind that masks fear. Genuine, thunderous amusement that rolled through the stone chamber like something between confidence and madness. He looked at the panicked faces around him and declared that he knew exactly what he was doing, that Roman was unlike any man he had ever encountered in his life, and his eyes carried fascination rather than dread. The troops would not be withdrawn. The order stood. The rebel forces at Hernard were to be wiped out completely. Belelphia clenched his jaw and accepted the command. There was nothing else he could do. But before the words had even fully left his mouth, the chamber doors burst open. A guard, breathless and pale, sprinted inside with a single report. Roman had appeared at Marlin, the capital, the seat of the empire, the so-called impregnable fortress. The hall erupted. Ministers exchanged horrified glances. Nobody could explain how he had gotten there so fast or why he had come alone. Outside the towering walls, Roman stood beneath the dark sky, radiating a stillness that felt more dangerous than rage. The guards on the battlements trained their weapons on him and demanded identification. He told them exactly who he was, Roman Dmitri of the Dmitri kingdom. The confusion that followed was almost predictable. A man standing alone before a fortified imperial capital, surely he had come to surrender. The gates, per orders from above, slowly ground open. A messenger cautiously approached and asked why Roman had come. Roman's answer was methodical. Marlin's walls were famous for a reason. High, reinforced, surrounded by layered magic circles designed to disrupt spellcasting. The only reliable way inside was through the warp gate, or by having the gates opened from within. He had considered two options: force his way through the fortress directly, pushing beyond his own limits, or make himself the bait and let Valhalla open the gates for him. He had chosen the second. As he finished speaking, Roman produced a concealed magic scroll from his wrist. The messenger barely had time to shout a warning before the scroll activated. Darkness swallowed everything. The blackout spell, dark cloud, erupted outward in every direction, consuming the soldiers before they could react. Within seconds, the entire area outside the gates was wrapped in impenetrable shadow. Guards stumbled blindly. Weapons pointed at nothing. The wall of darkness pressed down on their senses and hollowed out their confidence. One guard tried to hold the line. He reminded the others that dark cloud had no direct lethality. It was a visual disruption, nothing more. Keep formation, hold position, wait for the mages to dispel it. He was trembling as he said it. Then the screaming started. One by one, sounds cut through the darkness. Not battle cries, but the kind of sounds that follow finality, the kind that leave silence in their wake. When the Imperial mages finally cast moonlight and pushed back the shadows, the guard found himself standing alone in a field of motionless bodies. Every soldier around him had fallen. The ground was still. The threat was already gone. Inside the audience hall, the atmosphere had collapsed entirely. Ministers muttered in barely concealed panic. Someone pointed out that Ares had already brought down Caesar, ranked first among Valhalla's elite. If Caesar was gone, who was left who could stand against Roman? Belelphia stood apart from them, silent, his heartbeat loud in his own ears. The emperor, however, had not moved. He sat on his throne with that same unsettling smile, as though the situation was developing exactly the way he had hoped. Then a single footstep echoed in the corridor outside. Everyone went still. Roman stepped into the chamber. He scanned the room briefly, noting that no one had fled despite knowing he was coming. He found that mildly interesting. Did that mean they believed they could stop him? He walked forward steadily as he said what he had come to find out. Whether Valhalla truly had the power to prevent a direct assassination attempt from him, he intended to witness the answer himself. The Emperor raised one hand lazily. From the shadows around the throne, a group of hooded figures materialized, cloaked, still, radiating a dark and suffocating aura. The chamber shifted. Even the air felt different. Roman's sword moved before anyone could blink, one clean, devastating slash. The hooded figures came apart instantly, but something was wrong. The Emperor spoke without flinching. Those beings could not be destroyed through conventional force. They were the immortal swordsmen. As his words settled over the room, the severed fragments of each figure dissolved quietly into the air, and then began to reform, piece by piece, back into complete standing forms. Roman had just cut them down without effort, and they were already getting back up. Deep inside the imperial audience chamber of Valhalla, the air itself felt different. Roman Dmitri stood at the center of the hall, completely still, while the Empire's immortal soldiers closed in from every direction. These were no ordinary fighters. They were the backbone of Valhalla's military dominance, warriors who could not be permanently destroyed. And yet Roman didn't move a single step backward. As the soldiers charged, Roman's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. One measured swing of his sword, and the nearest attacker was cleanly bisected before the man even registered the threat. A second soldier lunged from behind, hoping to exploit the opening. Roman deflected the strike without even turning to look, then cut the attacker down with the same quiet efficiency. What made the scene strange wasn't the speed or the precision, it was the calm. Roman watched the fallen soldiers dissolve into particles of light, reform from nothing and rise again, completely restored. He smiled, not with relief, with curiosity. He pressed forward anyway. The next pass was different. Roman didn't wait for them to fully reconstitute. He moved through the chamber like a current, dismantling every soldier in his path and denying them the time they needed to recover. His objective wasn't to destroy them permanently. It was to clear a path. Roman launched himself directly toward the throne, his sword raised high. The stone floor fractured from the force of his leap. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Emperor himself would be struck down in his own hall. But the throne was empty when the blade fell. The impact shattered the Emperor's seat completely, stone and timber exploding outward across the chamber floor. And just beyond the great doorway, the Emperor reappeared for only a moment. His expression wasn't fear, it was amusement. He acknowledged that the encounter had been genuinely entertaining, then vanished entirely. What followed was silence, then chaos. The officials who had built their careers on loyalty to the imperial crown stood paralyzed. Among them was Marquis Belelphia, a man of considerable rank within the empire, and right now, a man who looked like he was trying very hard not to show how frightened he was. Roman turned toward him, unhurried, deliberate. When one of the officials broke down and threw himself to the ground begging for mercy, Roman responded without hesitation, cutting the man down in a single motion. The chamber went absolutely silent. Roman looked at the body with an expression of cold indifference and simply noted that no one had given the man permission to speak. He then turned his attention back to Belelphia. Grabbing him by the throat, Roman spoke plainly. He told the Marquis that pride had been Valhalla's downfall, that if the Empire had ever chosen to honestly face the reality of what was happening in the north, even once, things might have ended differently. Roman gestured around the hall at the kneeling officials and told Belelfir to look carefully. These were the men who had pledged everything to an emperor who had just abandoned them without a second thought. Belelfir was left alive. That, in its own way, was the cruelest choice Roman could have made. Far from the capital, deep within a forest near the northern mountain range, a teleportation circle burned itself into the earth. Roman stepped through, with Nox waiting nearby, visibly exhausted from the effort of maintaining the spell without a proper warp gate. Nox expressed concern that the entire operation had been unnecessarily reckless. Roman, walking ahead without breaking stride, told him the mission was never about killing the Emperor. The real objective had been something far more difficult to undo: doubt. Roman had wanted the people of Valhalla, its soldiers, its nobility, its officials, to understand that the Empire could be reached, that even the Emperor could be made to flee, that the invincibility they had always taken for granted was, in fact, not guaranteed. That kind of damage doesn't heal with more soldiers. It spreads. Back inside the ruined audience chamber, the Emperor reappeared, settling onto the shattered remains of his throne with practiced composure. His expression, however, was cold. He looked at the surviving officials less like allies and more like a liability he was tolerating for now. When Marquis Belelfir bowed and told him they had been fortunate to survive, the Emperor's reply was brief and ominous. He hoped those words were sincere. Then came the new orders. The bulk of Valhalla's military forces were to be redirected. Only a minimum holding force would remain to contain the resistance at Hernard. Everything else was to be focused entirely on Roman Dmitri. Belelfir accepted the command without argument, but privately he understood something that had shifted permanently. The atmosphere in that hall was not the same. The quiet deference that the Emperor had always commanded, the unspoken certainty that Valhalla was untouchable, was gone, and the officials around him felt it too. Roman hadn't just invaded the capital, he had changed what the Empire believed about itself. Meanwhile, on the battlefield at Hernard, the rebel forces were being pushed to their absolute limit. Sanchez stood beside Duke Vito, both of them aware that the situation was critical. Sanchez carried the weight of knowing that the Duke had committed everything to this fight, and that they were close to losing. Duke Vito refused to accept that framing. He told Sanchez to keep fighting and stop treating the battle as already lost. Then, from the enemy camp, a sound cut through the noise. A signal, the order to retreat. The Valhalla soldiers looked just as surprised as anyone. But orders were orders, and they pulled back from the walls without delay. The rebel fighters of Hernard didn't cheer immediately. They stood there, uncertain, processing what they were seeing. Then the understanding settled over them all at once. The siege was over. They had held. The cheers that followed weren't triumphant. They were the sound of exhausted people who had simply survived something they weren't supposed to. Roman's infiltration of the Valhalla imperial capital is complete. The Emperor has retreated. The nobility has been rattled. An entire empire now knows that its walls are not as high as they believed. And somewhere in the north, Roman is already planning the next move. The question isn't whether Valhalla will respond, it's whether that response will arrive in time. Duke Vieto stood atop the defensive wall, watching the horizon. The dust rising in the distance told the story clearly. The Imperial army was pulling back, column by column, in disciplined formation. Under normal circumstances, watching your enemy retreat should feel like relief. But Duke Vieto wasn't relieved, he was troubled. Because a general doesn't abandon a winning position without a reason. The Imperial forces had held the momentum throughout this engagement. There was no logical explanation for them to simply stop, turn around and walk away, which meant the reason existed somewhere else, somewhere outside the battlefield entirely. And that unknown variable was far more dangerous than anything happening in front of him. He called for Sanchez immediately. His orders were direct. Contact their informants in the capital and find out what happened. Something had changed, and they needed to understand it before they could act on it. The informants arrived and delivered their report. When they spoke, the room went still. The cause of the imperial retreat was Roman Dmitri. He had entered the capital of Valhalla alone, not as part of a coordinated strike, not backed by an army. Just Roman Dmitri, moving through the capital on his own terms, turning it into a one-sided slaughter. He had put a blade directly at the Empire's throat from the inside, and the chaos that followed was enough to force Count Gomez, who had been coordinating the front-line forces, to issue an emergency recall. The entire Imperial army pulled back because one man made it necessary. Sanchez immediately lit up. For him, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Roman had finally acted, and the result was exactly what the rebels needed. He turned to Duke Vieto, clearly expecting to share in the celebration. But Duke Vieto wasn't celebrating, he was thinking. After a long silence, he offered a single observation that cut straight through the excitement in the room. Roman didn't come to help the rebels. He went after the Emperor. The capital wasn't a rescue operation. It wasn't a coordinated move in support of their cause. Roman had executed his own objective on his own timeline, and the rebels simply benefited from the fallout. Sanchez pushed back. Even if Roman acted independently, the results still worked in their favor. Abandoning their relationship with him entirely didn't make sense. That was the moment something shifted in Duke Vieto. He began to laugh, not out of relief, not out of surprise, but out of genuine, almost reluctant admiration. The more he turned it over in his mind, the more clearly he could see it. Roman hadn't just abandoned the rebels. He had used the timing of that abandonment as a weapon. He had identified the exact moment the rebel forces would be at their lowest, stretched thin, pressured from all sides, struggling to hold, and at that precise moment, instead of reinforcing them, he turned and struck at the heart of the Empire itself. By walking away from the rebels, he cornered the entire imperial family in a single move. The boldness of it, the patience of it, the precision of it. Duke Vieto explained it plainly to Sanchez. This wasn't recklessness, it was a calculation. Roman had seen the board clearly, waited for the right moment, and made a move that no one else would have dared to make. For a brief moment, Duke Vieto saw the shadow of someone he used to know, his old master, in the way Roman had approached this decision. There was no time to dwell on it. The current situation was an opportunity that wouldn't stay open long, and Duke Vieto immediately issued the order. Summon all the rebel leaders. Whatever comes next, it starts now. The Valhalla Empire wasn't only dealing with what Roman had done inside its capital. Far to the west, 3 kingdoms, Redford, Umberto and Frank, had quietly assembled a massive military presence along Valhalla's western border. The sheer scale of the build-up made it impossible to ignore. Valhalla sent a messenger with all the authority the Empire could project. The message was blunt. Explain the military concentration. If the Alliance had hostile intentions toward Valhalla, the Emperor would not let it stand. Standing across from that messenger was Drake, the Alliance representative. He listened without any visible concern, and when the silence stretched, he responded with complete composure. The kingdoms had gathered for training. It was a routine exercise. Nothing about it was unusual or worth worrying over. The messenger was furious. Even a short time ago, dismissing Valhalla like this would have been unthinkable. The Empire's name alone carried weight that commanders throughout the continent respected. But Drake continued in the same unhurried tone, adding that the Alliance had no interest in crossing into Valhalla's territory and sincerely hoped everything could be resolved peacefully. His expression as he said it was almost pleasant. No one believed a word of it. Valhalla certainly didn't. And that was the entire point. It didn't matter whether the Alliance ever actually invaded. What mattered was that Valhalla now had to treat invasion as a constant, credible threat. Their military attention was fractured. Their resources were being pulled in multiple directions at once. The psychological toll of being surrounded, of waiting for a strike that might come at any moment, was doing its own damage, quietly and continuously. Valhalla had slipped perfectly into the shape Roman had designed for it without ever realizing the trap had been set. Inside the palace, In his private office, Marquis Belfier was not at peace. He had been pacing for some time. The memory of the day Roman invaded the palace kept returning to him, and at the centre of that memory was the moment the Emperor ran, not fought, not commanded the defence, simply ran, abandoning everyone around him to whatever came next. All of Marquis Belfier's years of service, all of his loyalty, all the sacrifices he had made in the name of the Empire, in the name of his duty to the throne. In that one moment, the Emperor had made it clear how much those things were worth to him. Nothing. They were useful while they were useful, and disposable the moment they weren't. The bitterness of that realization had settled into something colder and heavier as the days passed. Belfier's gaze drifted toward the communication device across the room. The imperial family's power wasn't absolute anymore. That was no longer a theory. It had been demonstrated loudly in front of everyone. And if Roman Dmitri couldn't be stopped, then there was really only one rational response left. He reached out and activated the device. He called Roman. Roman answered. He asked without preamble why Belfier was reaching out. Belfier skipped any pretense. He acknowledged plainly that Roman had not spared him out of mercy. There was a reason he was still alive, and he wanted to understand what that reason was. He asked directly what Roman wanted from him. Roman's response gave him almost nothing to work with. Prove your worth. You have 10 minutes. The pressure was immediate and total. Belfier reached for the most valuable information he had. He revealed that the rumours circulating about the Emperor aligning with the Kronos Empire were false. The reality traced back further to the former Emperor, who had specifically arranged for his 14th son to ascend the throne. The reasoning behind that decision remained a mystery even to Belfier, but he was certain the information itself was accurate. Roman was unmoved. He simply asked whether that was everything. Belfier realized quickly that it wasn't enough. He changed tactics. He argued his deeper value. His influence within Valhalla's political structure ran wide and deep. He could actively support the rebellion from the inside. In exchange, he wanted a place in whatever order followed the Empire's fall. He forced confidence into his voice as he made the offer. It wasn't a bad deal. For a moment, it seemed like Roman might engage with it. He acknowledged that Belfier's value was understood. Then he explained that he had never intended to accept it. Belfier was stunned. He pushed harder, listing his connections, his access, his position at the centre of Valhalla's power. Surely that counted for something. Roman dismissed it without hesitation. Belfier was overestimating himself. Then, in steady and measured terms, Roman laid out the truth. There is a clear line, he explained, between people who can still be negotiated with and those who have already gone too far past the point of no return. He asked Belfier which side of that line he stood on. Belfier had no answer. The silence said everything. Roman didn't wait for one. He explained exactly why he had kept Belfier alive, not for his political value, and not out of any potential usefulness going forward. The reason was simpler and more ruthless than that. Belfier's continued existence was enough on its own to plant deep distrust between him and the Emperor. The Emperor would wonder. He would suspect. Every day that Belfier remained alive and unaccounted for, that suspicion would grow. The path back to imperial grace wasn't narrowing. It had already closed entirely the moment Belfier picked up the communication device. And then came the final blow. In 15 days, Roman would send a complete recording of this conversation directly to the Valhalla Emperor. Belfier had no options left. His loyalty to the Empire was already destroyed in the Emperor's eyes. Any attempt to explain or walk back what he had said on that call would only confirm the suspicion. Roman laid it out with cold finality. If Belfier wanted to survive, he had one path forward: use every resource available to him to dismantle the Emperor from within. Otherwise, the recording arrives, and Belfier's fate is sealed regardless. The line went dead. For several long moments, Marquis Belfier stood completely still. Then the weight of it all broke loose at once. Rage, despair, fear, the crushing helplessness of a man who has finally understood, too late, how thoroughly he was outmaneuvered. He hurled the communication device to the floor and destroyed it beneath his feet. Because now he understood what had been true from the very beginning, every step he took leading to that call, every word he chose during it, every calculation he made about leverage and survival. Roman had already accounted for all of it. The conversation wasn't a negotiation, it was a closing statement on a trap that had been set long before Belfire ever reached out. A communication device clicks off with finality, the sound swallowed by the shadowed ruins surrounding Roman Dmitri. He stands tall in the dim grandeur of crumbling architecture, and the expression on his face is not one of relief or triumph. It is something far more deliberate than that. It is the look of a man watching a machine he built begin to move exactly as designed. Roman has been thinking about human nature, specifically about desperation. He understands, with the kind of cold clarity that only comes from years of calculated manoeuvring, that people do not act with true desperation until they are pushed to the very edge of destruction. Comfort breeds complacency. Pressure, however, the kind that comes from every direction at once, that breeds action. And Roman has made sure that the pressure on the Valhalla Empire is now arriving from every conceivable angle. The situation surrounding Valhalla is nothing short of suffocating. The Herna rebels are pushing hard from one direction. Furious citizens have begun rioting within the Empire's own borders, their anger turning into chaos that the government can barely contain. Roman's allied forces are massed and organized in the north, a disciplined military threat ready to strike. And stationed along the western front, the Kingdom Alliance waits, another wall of iron closing in. Valhalla is not simply under pressure, it is being crushed. But Roman didn't stop there. The most devastating part of his strategy isn't the armies outside the gates, it's the rot he has cultivated from within. Traitors now exist at the highest levels of Valhalla's nobility. Duke Vieto and Marquis Belfier, men who once swore their allegiances to the Empire, have already been turned. The Empire's greatest enemy is no longer approaching from outside. It has already moved in, seated comfortably at the table. Roman surveys an empty throne in front of him, a symbol without a ruler behind it. And he is satisfied. The board is set. Every piece is in position. No matter how Valhalla attempts to respond to the chaos erupting around it, Roman has engineered the situation so that the House of Dmitri emerges as the true beneficiary of whatever outcome follows. There is, however, one variable left. Roman's eyes go sharp. The dark aura behind his gaze intensifies, because for all his preparation, for all his meticulous layering of threats and betrayals, there is one force he cannot fully predict or control: the Kronos Empire. If Kronos decides to abandon its neutrality and move against him, the entire carefully constructed architecture of his plan could collapse in an instant. Kronos alone possesses the power to pull Valhalla back from the edge of the cliff Roman has driven it to. And so, without hesitation, Roman acts. Days pass. Deep within Kronos territory, something dramatic splits the air. A crackling sphere of intense blue magical energy detonates outward, and from its blazing centre steps a man, Count Fabius. He steps into the grand chamber of the Kronos Empire, coughing from the brutal toll of long-distance magical travel, adjusting himself with the practiced composure of someone who has walked into hostile rooms his entire career. He strokes his moustache, takes a slow look around, and notes with the practiced calm of a professional that the heavily armoured Kronos knights, completely encircling the warp pad, do not seem particularly pleased to see him. He is told to follow. He complies, but on his own terms. Before being led away, he makes it perfectly clear that he is not interested in being handed off to a minor official. He wants to be brought before whoever is actually making decisions within the Empire, while the Emperor remains in seclusion. And then, with the casual confidence of a man who has absolutely nothing to prove, he warns the guards that if they fail to meet his standard, he will simply leave. He is taken to Marquis Memphis. The setting is deliberately opulent, a lavish, well-lit office that speaks to the kind of institutional power that doesn't need to shout. Fabius finds himself comfortably seated across from the Marquis, a cup of tea in hand, the atmosphere almost absurdly civilized given the circumstances. The two men are not strangers. Fabius remarks on how frequently their paths seem to cross, and makes a dry observation about the relentless demands placed on men who are considered indispensable by their respective lords. Memphis is not in the mood for pleasantries. His expression is cold and contained, and he cuts the social warmth short with a direct instruction to get to the point. Fabius, unbothered, obliges. He raises the subject of Kronos' military movements, specifically the growing troop concentrations near the Cairo border. These have been publicly dismissed as routine training exercises, but the timing, given the ongoing conflict between Dmitri and Valhalla, is impossible to ignore. Fabius sets down his teacup with precision and makes the implicit threat explicit. These troop movements have drawn the serious attention and displeasure of Roman Dmitri. A heavy quiet settles over the room. Marquis Memphis receives the warning and responds with something that could almost be described as amusement. He calmly rejects the framing entirely, stating that Kronos' military decisions are not a matter for Dmitri to concern himself with. Fabius doesn't escalate. Instead, he laughs. He says he expected that answer. Then he shifts the angle slightly. Even without a formal agreement between Kronos and Valhalla, he points out, the optics of these troop movements create a political liability that could spiral into something far more complicated than either side wants. Memphis cuts him off. His hands clasp together, and his tone drops into something colder and more precise. He lays out Kronos' actual position with brutal honesty. If they had genuinely intended to launch a surprise offensive against Dmitri, they would not have waited as long as they have. And then he drives the real point home. Dmitri is no longer a nation that requires cautious, elaborate manoeuvring to deal with. The bluntness catches Fabius slightly off guard. He recovers quickly, noting dryly that professionals find extreme directness deeply uncomfortable. But internally, Fabius is processing something important. The truce between Dmitri and Kronos is not peace. It is a pause. Both sides know the war between them is not finished. It has simply been set aside, while other matters take priority. That pause is precarious, and the ease with which Memphis is handling this meeting tells Fabius something about what Kronos is really planning. He leans forward and names it directly. He asks Memphis if Kronos is simply buying time, and suggests that the Marquis's relaxed posture in the middle of such a tense situation is practically a confession. And then Fabius delivers Roman's final message. Regardless of what Kronos truly intends, the moment the Empire makes any aggressive move, Dmitri will respond, immediately and without mercy. Roman's presence seems to darken the air between them as the ultimatum lands. Memphis does not react with offence. He laughs. Genuinely, he praises Fabius, calling his reputation for sharp persuasion well earned. Then he stops laughing, and with a single raised finger he gives Kronos' formal commitment. The truce holds. The Empire will actively scale back its border movements and is prepared to reduce troop numbers to satisfy Dmitri's concerns. The guarantees are larger and more concrete than Fabius likely expected. But Memphis isn't finished. He fixes Fabius with a piercing look and asks why a man of his reputation, a man famous throughout the region for his shrewdness, not his recklessness, would willingly walk into what is essentially enemy territory on a diplomatic errand with no military backing. Fabius stands. He looks at the guards near the door. He answers simply and with complete conviction. He is here because Roman Dmitri needed him here. And that, he implies, is reason enough. He turns, thanks Memphis for the tea, and walks out the door without looking back. While that negotiation unfolds, something darker is taking shape in Valhalla itself. Inside a hidden chamber, 4 cloaked figures sit around a small table lit only by a single candle. Their voices are low and urgent. The news they are reacting to is devastating. Kronos has confirmed it will stay out of the conflict. Valhalla will receive no salvation from the east. The Empire is going to fall, and these men, these nobles, know they will not be spared when it does. Marquis Belfier speaks from beneath his hood. His logic is merciless and clear. Whether the Emperor's forces or the rebel faction ultimately wins, neither outcome ends without a blood price, and the nobles will be the ones paying it. Every military mobilization, every escalation, every move made under the Emperor's increasingly erratic leadership, it is consuming the resources, the legacies, and the lives of the nobility. There is only one way out of this trap. The room goes tense as Belfier lays it out. They cannot simply wait for a winner to emerge and hope for mercy. They must take control of the conflict themselves. They must seize the rebellion and direct it. The other nobles are stunned into silence, but Belfier's mind is already elsewhere, already in motion. Dawn breaks over the Valhalla Imperial Palace, golden and deceptively peaceful. Below that tranquil sky, dark-cloaked silhouettes move with purpose and discipline through the grounds of the Imperial stronghold. There is no alarm, no sound of combat, no blood, because they don't need any of that. The gates of the fortress swing open from the inside. The captain of the guard, a man Belfier himself arranged to be placed in that exact position, has delivered precisely what was asked of him. The interior of the stronghold has already been compromised. The bribes were paid long ago. The loyalties were quietly purchased. The defences are hollow. Belfier receives the report and his expression breaks into something dangerous and satisfied. The entire Imperial stronghold, the seat of Valhalla's military authority, has fallen without a single blow being struck. And then, from beneath his crimson hood, Belfier raises his voice and gives the order. The full assault on the Valhalla Imperial Palace has begun. Roman Dmitri built a trap designed to be inescapable. But as the nobles of Valhalla launch their own move against the Emperor, and as Kronos quietly adjusts its position, the question is no longer whether Valhalla will fall. The question is who gets to decide what rises in its place, and whether even Roman's calculations are precise enough to account for what happens next. Inside the breached gates of the Imperial Palace, the rebellion surged forward like a flood that refused to be stopped. Swords clashed against the last loyalist guards still standing in their path, and at the front of it all rode Marquis Belfier, his hood pulled back just enough to reveal eyes burning with both excitement and hunger. He bellowed for his men to press the attack, ordering anyone who refused to surrender cut down without mercy. For a moment, it seemed almost too easy. A symbol of unshakable authority for generations, the palace was falling apart in front of him, and he could hardly believe how little resistance they'd met so far. The rebels poured through the corridors and surged up a grand staircase lined with deep red carpet, certain the throne itself waited just beyond. Belfier roared at his men to push through this final stretch, certain nothing left could stop them now. He was wrong. At the top of the stairs, a line of robed figures in yellow and gold stood utterly still, radiating a pressure that froze the charge in its tracks. These were the Empire's elite mages, and they made no effort to hide their contempt, demanding to know what kind of fools would dare cause chaos within the palace's sacred halls. As their voices echoed through the hall, a wave of dark, oppressive energy rolled outward, and many of the rebels instinctively tensed, sensing they had just walked into something far worse than ordinary soldiers. Then came the second blow. From the shadows behind the mages, armoured figures emerged in eerie silence, each one radiating a cold, deathly aura that made the temperature in the hall seem to drop. These were the immortal swordsmen. Beings the rebels had heard whispered about, but never truly understood. Belfier screamed for his men to hold the mages back while he tried to organise a response, but there was no time to think. The mages struck first, gathering a violent surge of compressed wind and hurling it forward in a single blast meant to crush anything in its path. Rebel spellcasters barely managed to counter it in time, and the two sides locked into a standoff of clashing magical force. While the mages duelled in mid-air, the immortal swordsmen launched their own assault. They tore through the rebel ranks with a speed and brutality that bordered on inhuman, scattering soldiers and cutting down anyone careless enough to stand in their way. One rebel barely managed to block an incoming strike, while another threw himself forward and landed a powerful slash that tore a deep gash straight through one swordsman's body. For a heartbeat, it looked like a real wound. A real victory. But the creature didn't even flinch. Its eyes showed no trace of pain, and within seconds it retaliated, slashing the rebel across the chest hard enough to send blood spraying into the air. Elsewhere in the same melee, the captain of the guard managed to cut one of the immortal swordsmen down entirely, the blade slicing clean through its body. For a brief moment, hope flickered through the rebel ranks. Then that hope collapsed just as quickly. The fallen swordsman's body dissolved into dust, with an unsettling, almost amused expression still lingering on its face, only to reform moments later, flesh and armour rebuilding itself as if nothing had happened. It resumed its assault without missing a beat. Watching this unfold, Belfier felt something close to despair settle over him. He remembered hearing about creatures like this clashing with Roman Dmitri in the past, but he had never truly believed the stories were literal until he saw the regeneration with his own eyes. If the swordsman genuinely could not be killed, the rebellion would be crushed before it ever reached the throne. Then, just as the battle seemed lost, something shifted. The immortal swordsmen suddenly faltered, their movements turning erratic and unstable. Dark, corrupted energy began tearing free from their bodies, ripping through their cloaks and armour, as thick black smoke bled out from every joint. They looked for the first time like they were in genuine pain, as though some invisible force sustaining them was failing all at once. Belfier didn't hesitate. He screamed for his men to throw everything they had left into one final all-out charge, recognizing this sudden weakness might be the only opening they would ever get. The rebels surged forward without restraint, swords, spears, and spell after spell crashing down on the crumbling immortal swordsmen, and the mages who had begun losing their composure as well. The fight that followed was short but brutal, and by the time the dust settled, the hall was littered with bodies on both sides. Standing amid the wreckage, Belfier surveyed the carnage with a strange unease creeping into his chest. They had won. The mages and the immortal swordsmen lay defeated around him, and yet something about it all felt wrong. The Emperor of Valhalla was not a man who would simply let his palace fall without a far more dangerous trick still in reserve. It didn't take long to find the source of his unease. Thick black energy was seeping from beneath a set of heavy doors deeper in the palace. Belfier threw them open and found the Emperor sitting calmly on his bed, as though none of the chaos outside concerned him at all. The Emperor greeted his arrival with quiet disappointment, acknowledging the betrayal without a hint of surprise, while Belfier fired back that it was the Emperor who had abandoned his own people first. With an unsettling, almost amused calm, the Emperor told him he had made a foolish choice and raised a hand, clearly expecting to summon the same dark power that had sustained his immortal guardians. Nothing happened. The Emperor stared at his own empty palm in genuine confusion, and in that silence, the truth dawned on him. His power had been pulled away from him entirely, which explained exactly how the rebels had managed to break through guardians that should have been unstoppable. Reading this as nothing more than desperate stalling, Belfier ordered his men to seize him. The Emperor offered no resistance whatsoever as the soldiers grabbed his arms. Instead, he simply smiled, an expression of genuine, almost peaceful relief washing over his face as he murmured that he was finally free. What followed played out in the city's main plaza beneath the open sky. A crowd gathered around a hastily built set of gallows, jeering and shouting accusations at the bound Emperor, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong in Valhalla and demanding his death. Belfier stood beside him on the platform, slipping the noose around his neck and mockingly asking if he had any final words. Rather than fear, the Emperor responded with a low, chilling laugh, looking out over the furious crowd as though amused by their hatred. He wondered aloud how many of them actually understood who he truly was, then dismissed them all as pathetic, declaring that it was they, not him, who had truly destroyed the Empire. Panic flashed across Belfier's face. Certain the Emperor was on the verge of revealing something that could expose them all, he cut him off and gave the order to execute him immediately. The platform dropped, the rope snapped taut, and the Emperor's final unspoken thought lingered only in his expression, that Valhalla had already been doomed long before this moment. For a ruler who had once commanded an entire era, his end came with almost no spectacle at all. Far from the execution, news of the emperor's death reached Roman Dmitri through a breathless messenger who reported that the rebellion led by Belfir had succeeded completely. Roman said nothing at first, recalling the raw power he had personally witnessed from the emperor in the past. A group of rebels alone shouldn't have been capable of ending a ruler like that. Only one possibility made sense to him. The Kronos Empire must have quietly intervened behind the scenes. A faint, knowing smile crossed his face as he remarked that things were becoming far more interesting than expected. Back within the palace, Belfir allowed himself a moment of triumph, privately congratulating himself for being the true architect behind the rebellion's success, regardless of who officially led it. He dismissed Roman Dmitri as a fading threat now that he held the political high ground, and his thoughts drifted toward the throne itself, the goal he had quietly longed for all along. His celebration was cut short when a subordinate rushed in, urging him to come to the city gates at once. There, the streets were filled with cheering crowds and falling flower petals as the Duke of Vieto made his entrance into the capital, hailed as the hero who had saved Valhalla. Belfir stepped forward to greet him with practiced courtesy, internally unsettled that the Duke had arrived far sooner than he'd planned for. His scheme to position himself as an equal power before the Duke's return was already falling apart, and he was forced to think on his feet. As he offered the Duke a polite suggestion to rest after his journey, one of the cloaked figures standing behind him stepped forward and pulled back his hood. It was Roman Dmitri. Belfir's confidence shattered instantly. Before he could process why the very man he had just dismissed was standing in the heart of the capital, the Duke of Vieto gave a sharp command for the soldiers to arrest the traitor before them. A warrior named Sanchez moved with startling speed, tackling Belfir to the ground before he could even react. Pinned and panicking, all Belfir could do was demand to know what was happening and how he, of all people, was being branded a traitor. One soldier in blue cloaks force Marquis Belfir to his knees before Duke Vieto, and no amount of struggling changes anything about his situation. He looks up at the Duke, a man carved from silence and certainty, and begins to plead his case with everything he has left. He killed the Emperor. He says it loudly, almost proudly. Before Vieto even reached the capital, Belfir's own hands ended the tyrant's reign. He is not a criminal. He is the man who gave Valhalla exactly what its people needed. How dare anyone call him a traitor? Duke Vieto listens. His face doesn't move. His eyes don't soften. When Belfir finally runs out of breath, Vieto gives a single quiet order to his soldiers. Take him away. The execution plaza is already full when Belfir arrives at the gallows. Thousands of Valhalla's citizens pack the square, drawn not just by spectacle, but by the quiet promise of a new beginning. Something is ending today. Something else is starting. And Duke Vieto stands before them all, not as a rebel or a conspirator, but as the voice of judgment. He lays out Belfir's crimes one by one, with the kind of calm that is more devastating than anger. The Marquis, Vieto tells the crowd, was never a hero. He was the Emperor's most loyal instrument. The man who enabled a reign of cruelty, violated the sacred code of warrior duels, and personally conspired to assassinate Roman Dmitri during the Valhalla festival. He did not act out of conviction. He acted out of convenience. And Belfir, even now, with a noose around his neck, cannot stay quiet. He screams down from the gallows that he was only following imperial orders, that everything he did was by command, that he had no choice. Vieto's calm breaks for just a moment. He turns on Belfir with a fury that silences even the crowd. Then, in a voice steady enough to carry to every corner of the plaza, he delivers the detail that truly defines who Belfir is. The moment the rebellion began gaining ground, the moment it became clear the Emperor was going to lose, Belfir didn't stand and fight. He didn't stay loyal to the man he served. He quietly sent word to Roman Dmitri and begged for a place among the rebels. Not for Valhalla, not for its people, for himself. The crowd absorbs that in silence, But Belpir has one final play. He turns to the citizens, voice cracking, arms straining against his ropes, and accuses Vieto directly. "They planned this together," he shouts. "The Duke is no more innocent than he is. And if Belpir is a traitor, what does that make Vieto?" He tells the crowd he is Valhalla's true saviour, the man who personally ended the tyrant's life. And he is the one who deserves the throne, not the Duke standing below him. The plaza goes completely still. No one moves, no one responds. The crowd simply stares up at the man hanging above them, and their silence is the most brutal answer they could give. Then something happens that breaks Belpir in a way no sword ever could. A voice finds him. Not from the crowd, not from the platform, not from anywhere around him. It comes from inside his own mind. Cold, unhurried, absolute. It tells him that his life ends here, today, on this exact spot, and not just his life, his entire bloodline. Erased, a final gift, the voice says, offered for their reunion. Belpir's eyes sweep the crowd in wild, sweating panic. And then he finds the source. A figure stands still among the citizens below the gallows, wrapped in a deep red hood. Not running, not hiding, just watching with the flat, expressionless gaze of someone who has already decided how this ends. Roman Dmitri. The citizens near him pull back in shock, suddenly aware of the overwhelming presence radiating from that still, cloaked figure. And in the moment, Belpir's mind finally processes who that voice belongs to. The trap door beneath his feet snaps open. The rope pulls taut. Duke Vieto closes his eyes and turns his head away. He doesn't watch. Marquis Belpir, the man who helped topple an empire, who held political power over all of Valhalla and used every last piece of it to survive, meets precisely the same fate as the emperor he so eagerly abandoned. Death on a gallows, watched by thousands, mourned by none. Behind the closed door of Vieto's private office, the noise of the city feels far away. The Duke sits forward at his desk and speaks with the kind of directness that doesn't require an audience. Valhalla, he tells Roman, owes him more than words can carry. The rebellion would have collapsed without him. That is simply the truth. Roman, standing across the room in his red cloak, receives it the way he receives most things, without ceremony. He tells Vieto that a deal was made and a deal was honoured, nothing more than that. Then he says there is something he needs. Vieto leans back, warm and willing. "Name it," he says. "Whatever falls within my power, consider it done." Roman looks at him steadily. He wants access to the Tomb of the South. The warmth leaves Vieto's face so quickly it's almost startling. His eyes widen. For a long moment, he says nothing at all. The Tomb of the South is not a place most people speak of lightly. Hidden somewhere deep within the southern jungle, buried under generations of silence and shadow, stands a massive stone pyramid wrapped in layers of ancient moss. Time has not been gentle to it. Vines crawl across its surface, roots push through its cracks. But the structure itself refuses to fall. It has been standing since before anyone alive can remember. This is where Valhalla buries its emperors. Every ruler who ever commanded this empire rests within those walls. To seek entry is not simply a request. It is a declaration that you intend to claim whatever wisdom or power those emperors left behind. Vieto would open those gates right now if he could. He says so. But the tomb does not work that way. There is a trial, ancient and bound by traditions so deep that even the new ruler of Valhalla cannot simply override it. Not for anyone, not even for the man who saved the empire. He details what the trial demands. 7 consecutive days inside the stone arena at the jungle's edge. Every warrior in Valhalla who chooses to step forward may do so, and many will, one after another, without pause, without mercy. If Roman somehow survives the full 7 days against that relentless tide, a second challenge waits. The indigenous people of the jungle, the ones who have guarded the tomb across generations, answering to no empire and no emperor, will then pass their own judgment on whether he is worthy to enter. 7 days. An entire empire's worth of warriors. Then guardians no one fully understands. Roman's expression doesn't change. He tells Vieto simply to arrange the arena, and whatever happens inside it, he is not to hold anyone responsible. Vieto studies him for a long moment. Then he agrees. The trial begins at dawn, but before the arena fills, there is something worth understanding about what this trial actually means. Carved into a moss-covered gravestone near the tomb's entrance is an inscription that generations of warriors have read, and many have died chasing. It promises peerless enlightenment, a transformation of skill and understanding so complete that anyone who clears the trial will emerge as something beyond an ordinary fighter. No one was ever able to verify whether that inscription told the truth. Legends built up around it. Fighters travelled from across the empire, drawn by the promise of something greater than themselves. Most of them never came back. The arena around the tomb became a graveyard of shattered weapons and unfinished stories. Then, roughly a century ago, a lone, cloaked warrior walked out of the tomb's dark archway alive. His name was Carlos. The crowd of fighters waiting outside erupted. Had he found it? The techniques, the enlightenment. Did the inscription tell the truth? Carlos stood before them trembling, not with triumph, with something far heavier. He told them the truth. There is nothing inside, no secret, no enlightenment. The tomb of the South holds only one thing, the blood-soaked, unvarnished history of the Valhalla Empire. Nothing more. After Carlos spoke those words, the legend died. No one attempted the trial again. The arena fell quiet. The inscription on the gravestone became a curiosity rather than a promise. Until now. The announcement that the trial of the warrior had been revived reached every corner of Valhalla within hours, and the reaction was unlike anything anyone expected. By the time the stone arena deep in the southern jungle opened its gates, thousands had already gathered. The tiered stone seating filled to capacity. Warriors, citizens, veterans, young fighters who had never held a sword in battle, all of them pressed together, all of them waiting for something they couldn't quite name, but desperately needed to see. The sound of measured footsteps on stone brings the crowd to its feet. A single figure ascends to the high platform overlooking the arena. The roar that follows is enormous. Voices call his name from every direction. Some call him a hero, some call him something more, the word emperor spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Duke Vieto stands before them, now wearing a golden laurel crown that catches the light of the open sky. Behind the composed exterior, something complex is happening. He had not anticipated the scale of this reaction. He had not expected the announcement of a single trial to ignite the empire this way. But as he looks out over the mass of people screaming his name, something crystallizes in him. These people were starving, not for food, for meaning, for a reason to believe that what they had fought through had led somewhere real. And Roman Dmitri, perhaps without intending to, had handed them a stage. Vieto tightens his fist at his side. Roman saved Valhalla. That is a fact. But this is still Valhalla's most sacred tradition. And Vieto will not stand above the arena while an outsider carves himself into the Empire's oldest story without resistance. He looks down at the arena floor below. Roman stands there already, red cloak, sword drawn, perfectly still. Vieto's voice carries across every corner of the arena as he declares the rules. 7 days. Any warrior of Valhalla who wishes to challenge the Outlander is free to enter. There are no restrictions. There is no limit. If Roman survives every last one of them, the jungle's guardians will render their own verdict. Only then will the path to the tomb open. Roman listens without any visible reaction. Behind that stillness, one thought registers. The jungle guardians must be the indigenous tribes who have protected this land long before the empire existed. That is a different kind of problem. One to handle when the 7 days are done. First, whoever is about to step into this arena. The first challenger doesn't need to be called twice. He strides forward from the edge of the arena, tall, heavily built, with the kind of physical presence that comes from years of actual combat, not training grounds. His hair is blonde, and around him crackles a fierce yellow aura. alive and dangerous like static before a lightning strike. He stops a measured distance from Roman and introduces himself. His name is Valderus, a veteran of the rebel forces, a man who stood on the right side when it mattered, and he means it when he says it is an honor to face Roman Dmitri today. There is no performance in those words. But what happens inside Valderus as he settles into his fighting stance tells a far more complicated story. He is not deluding himself, not for a second. He has seen what Roman did at the Valhalla festival. He knows what Roman did to the city of Marin, reduced its capital to nothing, and did not break a sweat doing it. The man standing across from him right now is not someone Valderus can simply defeat. That gap in raw power is real, and Valderus knows exactly how real it is. From the high platform above, Emperor Vieto watches in silence, and that is precisely why Valderus has already adjusted his objective. He cannot win this fight. But winning is not the point. The point is that Roman must face 6 more days of warriors after this one. Each warrior who steps into this arena is part of something larger, a slow, grinding erosion of Roman's stamina and energy, one battle at a time. Valderus's job is not to be the man who defeats the Outlander. His job is to be the man who makes the Outlander pay a price. Beyond the strategy, there is something deeper. Carlos was Valhalla's greatest warrior. His name is etched into this empire's identity. The idea of an outsider entering the tomb of the South, the one place Carlos alone had conquered, and carving his name above it is a wound Valderus simply cannot accept, even at the cost of his life. He surges forward. The stone floor scrapes under his feet as he launches himself upward, blade raised high, golden aura blazing around the steel, every ounce of his strength pouring into a single downward strike aimed directly at Roman's head. Roman's eyes narrow slightly, just slightly, and then Valderus's blade finds nothing but stone. The crash of steel on empty ground echoes through the silent arena. Valderus lands hard, off balance, staring at the crater his own blade made, and it takes half a breath for his mind to catch up with what just happened. Roman is gone. In the same fraction of a second that Valderus realizes this, a presence registers directly behind him. Roman has already moved, already closed the distance, already raised his blade, one clean, brutal slash, dark steel, purple aura. A burst of force that tears through the arena dust and sends Valderus to the ground with a cry of pain that carries all the way to the highest seats. Roman stands where he stopped, still, unhurried.